Tonight, we stand beside the slow Tufa towers of the Mono Basin, where mineral springs once rose quietly beneath a pale inland lake. Settle in and let the air grow still around you. The shoreline is cool under your feet, and the water holds a faint mineral scent, sharp with salt and softened by the dry sagebrush air moving down from the hills. You can feel how quiet this basin is, as if the mountains have gathered around it to keep the night from moving too quickly. Above you, the sky opens wide and dark, while Mono Lake rests below it, like a calm mirror, carrying the shapes of the Tufa towers in its silvery surface. Here in the Mono Basin, nothing feels rushed.
The lake has no river leading outward to the sea, so whatever enters this hollow place remains here, altered slowly by sun, wind, cold, and time. You can imagine water arriving from the snowy Sierra Nevada, slipping through streams and hidden underground paths, carrying dissolved calcium from stone it has touched in darkness. When that spring water met the carbonate-rich lake, something quiet began to form. It did not rise like a tree in air. It grew underwater, out of sight, while waves moved gently above it and brine swirled in soft green light. Calcium and carbonate joined together, grain by grain making pale limestone around the places where fresh spring water seeped upward. You would not have seen the tower at first, only a faint crust, then a rough little chimney, then a larger shape gathering itself in the hush beneath the lake. The Tufa towers of Mono Lake are not ruins, though they look ancient enough to be mistaken for them. They are records of water meeting water, and of chemistry moving with patience. Each ridge and pocket in the stone speaks of a spring, a current, a pause, a season when the lake stood higher and the tower was still submerged. You can rest your eyes on one pale column and feel how much of its story happened in darkness. The basin around you is wide and high, held between mountains, volcanic hills, and dry open flats. The Sierra Nevada rises to the west, gathering snow in winter and releasing it slowly when spring warms the granite slopes. To the east, the land stretches into the Great Basin, where water often gathers in closed hollows instead of traveling all the way to the ocean. Mono Basin is one of those quiet bowls, and you are standing at its edge. Because there is no outlet, Mono Lake keeps the minerals that rivers bring. Water leaves mostly by evaporation, lifting away into clear air while salt and carbonate remain behind. Over long periods, this makes the lake alkaline and saline, a place with a taste of mineral brightness and a surface that can feel almost silky against the skin. You can imagine the sun touching it day after day, drawing water upward, leaving the lake more concentrated and strange. Still, strange does not mean harsh here. It means particular, ancient, and beautifully adapted. Brine shrimp move through the water in small transparent clouds, and alkali flies gather near the shore, lifting and settling like a breathing shadow. Birds come and go with the seasons, finding food in this unusual lake. As you listen, you can almost hear the faint ticking of wings and the soft lap of water around limestone feet. The towers themselves seem still now, rising above the surface in pale clusters. Some are narrow and fluted, like candles shaped by water. Others are broad and rough, with little caves, rims, shelves, and openings where light collects. Their surfaces are not smooth, because they were made in flowing water, where mineral crust formed unevenly around spring vents, bubbles, plants, and older stone. You can let your gaze travel over them slowly. A Tufa tower begins with a meeting. Fresh groundwater, carrying calcium, rises from beneath the lake bed. The lake water, rich in carbonate, surrounds it. Where they touch, calcium carbonate comes out of solution and settles as solid stone. It sounds simple when said plainly, but in the water, it is a delicate and continuous exchange, like breath entering cold air and becoming visible for a moment. You can picture that meeting below the old lake surface when these towers were hidden in greenish depth. The water would have muted every sound. Light would have fallen through in soft bands, fading as it reached the spring vents below. Around each vent, mineral matter gathered slowly, building walls and tubes and terraces. The tower rose only as long as the spring continued to feed it, and as long as the lake held the right chemistry around it. Some tufa forms are like slender chimneys, some spread outward in knobby shelves, some gather around submerged plant stems or microbial films, taking on tangled, porous textures that remember the life once touching them. When you lean close in imagination, you can sense the rough coolness of the stone, full of openings where water once moved. It is a kind of frozen current, held in limestone. The Mono Basin itself has been changing for a very long time. Lakes have risen and fallen here with climate, snowpack, evaporation, and the slow tilting and shaping of the land. During wetter times, water spread higher across the basin, covering places that are dry shore now. During drier times, the lake withdrew and revealed shelves, flats, and towers that had formed beneath it. You and I are seeing a landscape made by movement so slow, it feels like stillness. As the evening deepens, the Tufa towers become less white and more blue. Their edges soften, and the lake begins to hold the last light in long, quiet bands. You can feel the desert cooling around you, one breath at a time, while the smell of salt, dust, and sage grows clearer. In this half-light, the Mono Basin seems almost underwater again, as though the old lake level has returned in memory. And as we let the shore grow darker around us, we move gently into the older water, where the towers were still forming below the surface. Under that older lake, the world was quieter than the open shore is now. The Tufa towers stood in muted green water, surrounded by fine suspended minerals and drifting life too small to notice at first. You would have felt the coolness close around your arms, not with force but like a soft layer of evening. Above, waves folded sunlight into ripples, and below spring water rose through sediment with patient pressure. The lake bed was not empty. It held mud, sand, volcanic ash, old shorelines, and hidden channels where groundwater could move. Water from snowmelt traveled through fractures and porous ground, touching minerals as it went. By the time it seeped upward into Mono Lake, it carried dissolved calcium from that underground passage. You can imagine that water arriving without sound, clear and cold, entering a lake that was already dense with carbonate. Where the two waters met, the chemistry shifted. Calcium ions from the spring water encountered carbonate ions in the lake. Together, they formed calcium carbonate, the same mineral family that builds limestone in many places on Earth. Here, though, the process gathered around underwater springs, so the stone grew in columns and mounds rather than in broad, flat beds. The Tufa Tower became a shape made by a chemical boundary. This is why the towers often stand where springs once emerged. They mark the old plumbing of the basin. Each tower is a clue to hidden water, to the slow conversation between mountain snow, underground stone, and alkaline lake. If you stand quietly enough, you can almost feel that connection beneath your feet, as if the Sierra is still speaking through cool spring water under the shore. The formation was not constant in every place. A stronger spring could build more quickly, while a weaker seep made smaller crusts and low mounds. Changes in lake level altered depth, temperature, pressure, and chemistry around the growing structure. Sediment could bury a vent, or currents could expose it again. The Mono Basin was always adjusting, but it adjusted in long breaths, not sudden movements. Tufa is often porous because it grows around spaces. Water moves, bubbles rise, organic surfaces decay, and minerals form around what is present. Later, when the soft material is gone, openings remain. That is why the towers can look lace-like, full of small hollows and rough pockets. You can imagine touching one gently and finding it cool, dry, and weathered, though it was born in water. The lake water itself helps create this feeling of otherness. Mono Lake is alkaline, meaning its chemistry leans toward the basic side, and its salts are concentrated by evaporation. It is not a freshwater mountain lake, clear and sweet. It is denser, brighter, and more mineral, with a faintly soapy feel that belongs to closed basins where water has lingered for ages. You sense that lingering in every pale tower. Because the basin is dry, evaporation is an important sculptor. Sunlight draws water upward from the lake's surface, especially through warm seasons and clear, windy days. The departing water leaves dissolved minerals behind, gradually increasing the lake's salinity and alkalinity. Over time, that concentration makes the meeting with calcium-rich springs more likely to create solid carbonate. The air itself becomes part of the architecture. You can sit with that thought for a while. A tower of stone may be shaped by wind that never touches it directly, by sunlight lifting water away, by snow falling miles away on granite slopes. Nothing in the Mono Basin is separate for very long. The white tufa, the dark lake, the sagebrush shore, and the mountain snow are all parts of one slow exchange. As we drift deeper into that exchange, the towers stop looking like objects and begin to feel like pauses in a long movement. The surface of Mono Lake changes with the hour. In morning, it can look blue and almost delicate, with the Tufa towers standing in clear light. At noon, the brightness sharpens, and the pale stone can glow against the darker water. By evening, the lake gathers violet, silver, and rose, and the towers seem to loosen their edges. You watch them become softer, as if they are returning to the water that made them. Their forms tell you about growth beneath an old surface. Some towers are tall because the lake once covered them deeply enough for upward growth to continue. Some are squat, because springs emerged near shallower margins, or because conditions changed before they could rise higher. The tower is not only a structure, it is also a measurement of former water, former chemistry, and former time. Lake levels in the Mono Basin have shifted naturally across thousands of years. Climate patterns changed the balance between incoming water and evaporation. Wetter centuries lifted the lake, drier centuries lowered it. Later, human diversion of streams lowered the lake further, revealing many tufa formations that had formed underwater. The exposed towers now stand in air, and you can see what earlier generations of water had been keeping. Yet even exposed, they remain water-shaped. Rain darkens them briefly. Frost touches their pores. Wind moves dust across their surfaces. Birds rest on them, and shadows fill their hollows at sunset. The towers are no longer growing in the same way once they stand above the lake, because the meeting of spring water and lake water has moved elsewhere. Their active life belonged mostly below the surface. That makes them feel tender, in a geological way. They are not dead, exactly, but paused. They hold the form of a process that needed submersion, and now they stand as pale witnesses along the shore. You can let that idea settle gently. Some landscapes reveal themselves only after the water leaves, and what appears to be dry stone may be a memory of depth. Near the shoreline, small waves slide around the bases of some towers. The sound is thin and soft, more like a whisper than a break. The water carries a mineral smell, and the mud can hold the faint scent of salt and organic life. If the evening is calm, reflections make each tower seem twice as tall, one form rising into air, and one sinking into the darkening lake. This reflected world suits Mono Lake. It is a place of doubles, water and desert, mountain snow and alkaline brine, hidden spring and visible tower. You stand between them, feeling the cool air on your face while imagining the old underwater light. The basin invites this kind of slow attention because every feature points both upward and downward, both backward and inward. The towers also have different textures depending on how they formed. Some are dense and massive, built from steady precipitation around spring outlets. Some are delicate and branching, shaped by microbial mats, plants, or small underwater surfaces that gave minerals a place to gather. Some resemble coral from a distance, though they are not coral at all. They are lake stone, formed by chemistry in an inland basin. Thinking of them as coral would bring the mind toward oceans, but Mono Basin has its own quiet identity. It is inland, dry, high, and ringed with volcanic and granitic landforms. Its lake is not connected to the sea, yet it carries a saline character because evaporation has done what oceans do over immense time. You can feel that difference in the air, where desert dryness and lake mineral meet. As night approaches, the basin's sounds become sparse. A breeze moves over low plants. Water touches stone. Somewhere, birds call across the open surface, their voices softened by distance. Nothing needs to hurry here. The Tufa towers have already waited through falling water, changing shorelines, and countless evenings just like this one, each arriving with a slow blue, quiet. Below this quiet surface, we follow the memory of the springs again, down into the meeting place where stone first began to gather. The spring water under Mono Lake begins far from the visible tower. It may start as snow, resting through winter on the Sierra Nevada, then melting into creeks, soils, fractures, and underground paths. As it moves through stone, it gathers calcium and other dissolved minerals in amounts too small to see. You can imagine it traveling in darkness, cool and patient, before it enters the lake from beneath. That underground journey matters. Water is a careful solvent, especially when it has time. It touches minerals, carries charged particles, and changes slightly with each hidden passage. By the time it rises into the alkaline waters of Mono Lake, it is ready for that pale reaction. The basin receives it quietly, and the tufa begins as a boundary made solid, a meeting captured in stone. The lake's carbonate comes from the weathering of rocks, from inflowing streams, and from the concentrating effect of evaporation. Carbonate ions remain in the closed basin because there is no outlet to flush them away. As fresh water leaves through the sky, these dissolved ingredients stay behind. Over many seasons, the lake becomes a reservoir of chemical possibility. Then a spring arrives with calcium, and the possibility becomes form. You do not need to picture this as a rapid building. It is slower than that. A thin coating appears. Another layer attaches. The surface becomes uneven, catching more mineral, guiding more flow. The tower grows by accumulation, with pauses and changes written into its shape. If the spring weakens, growth slows. If chemistry shifts, the texture changes. The stone remembers these variations in its grain. Around a growing tower, water would have moved differently. The new mineral surface would disturb little currents, creating sheltered pockets and narrow passages. Fine particles might settle there. Microbes could live on surfaces, influencing where carbonate formed. Small organisms could pass through, leaving no obvious trace, but taking part in the living atmosphere of the lake. You can sense how biology and geology overlap softly here. Mono Lake's living world is specialized but abundant. Brine shrimp graze in the water, filtering tiny algae. Alkali flies live at the shore and even move through the surface film, adapted to the lake's unusual chemistry. Birds feed on them in great seasonal rhythms. While tufa forms through mineral chemistry, it forms within a living lake, not an empty one. That gives the towers a quiet companionship. Imagine being beside one when it was submerged. The tower rises pale from the lake bed, its surface rough with mineral shelves. Tiny bubbles cling and release. Light moves over it in wavering patterns, broken by ripples above. The water is cool, dense and greenish, with a silence that makes every small motion seem slower. You drift near it without touching, and the tower keeps forming. There is comfort in a process that does not require attention to continue. The spring rises whether anyone watches. The ions meet. The mineral settles. The tower grows in darkness, following conditions rather than intention. The Mono Basin teaches this gently, because its most recognizable forms were made out of patience, not force. You can let that patience enter your breathing, one slow breath after another. Even the exposed towers keep teaching slowness. Weather rounds their edges a little. Salt crystals may form and vanish. Shadows deepen their hollows, then release them in morning. The lake rises slightly in wet periods and retreats in dry ones. Around the bases, mud dries, cracks, softens, and darkens again. The landscape is always moving, but at a pace the body can rest inside. The volcanic history of the region adds another layer to the basin's stillness. Nearby domes, craters, and dark islands speak of molten rock, ash, and heat from earlier chapters of the land. Yet tonight, that history feels cooled and quiet. The Tufa towers stand in the same basin as those volcanic forms, pale against darker hills, made not by fire but by water and dissolved stone. This contrast is part of Mono Basin's beauty. Granite snowfields feed hidden springs. Volcanic terrain shapes the basin floor. Dry air concentrates the lake. Alkaline water receives calcium and turns it into limestone. You are not looking at a single process, but at a slow gathering of many processes, each one calm enough to disappear into the background until the tower itself becomes visible. And as we move onward through the basin, the shoreline widens, and the towers begin to show how changing water levels reveal what time has made. The present shore of Mono Lake is only one position in a long history of shorelines. Around the basin, terraces and strand lines mark earlier lake levels, faint bands where waves once touched the land. You can picture the lake standing higher, covering flats that now hold dry dust, sagebrush and exposed tufa. The air you feel now was once water, resting above the towers in a cool mineral haze. When lake level drops, tufa towers emerge gradually. First, their tops appear, pale and wet in the sun. Then, more of the column rises into air as the water continues to recede. Surfaces that formed in darkness begin to dry, and textures once softened by water become sharp to the eye. You can imagine standing on the shore during such a change, watching hidden architecture become landscape. This revealing can make the towers seem sudden, but their formation was not sudden at all. What appears one year as a new landmark may have been growing underwater for centuries. The lake does not create the tower at the moment it exposes it. It only lifts the curtain. Mono Basin is full of these delayed recognitions, where the visible world arrives long after the work is done. The exposed tufa has a color that shifts with moisture and light. In bright sun, it can look chalky white or pale cream. After rain or near the waterline, it darkens, showing gray and tan tones in its pores. At sunset, it can hold gold, rose, or lavender along its ridges. You see the same stone change mood without ever moving, and that stillness feels deeply restful. The lake around it carries its own changing colors. Wind can roughen the surface into small dark scales. Calm can turn it glassy enough to hold clouds and mountains. Minerals and algae affect the water's tone, sometimes green, sometimes blue, sometimes a muted silver under cloud. The tufa towers stand within those colors like slow notes in a long piece of music. Because Mono Lake is shallow compared with the great oceans, wind can move its surface quickly, yet the basin's deeper time remains slow. A gust may wrinkle the water, a season may raise or lower the shore, a century may reveal or cover a field of tufa, a climate cycle may redraw the lake. You feel those scales of time layered together, from ripples to ages. The towers near the south shore are especially well known, but tufa appears in other places around the lake as well. Each cluster belongs to local springs and local conditions. Some stand apart, like quiet figures. Others gather in groups, their bases nearly touching, their forms rising with small differences in height and texture. You can walk slowly among them in imagination, noticing how no two are exactly alike. That difference is important. It reminds you that tufa is not poured from a mold. It grows through interaction. Water chemistry, spring strength, lake depth, temperature, sediment, and biological surfaces all help guide it. Each tower is a record of a particular place where underground water met Mono Lake. The basin writes in limestone, but each sentence has its own cadence. As darkness gathers, distance becomes harder to measure. A nearby tower may look like a weathered cliff, while a far cluster seems small and delicate against the lake. The mountains become shadow, and the sky opens wider. Your body senses cool air settling into the basin, sliding down from higher slopes. The scent of sagebrush grows dry and soft, mixing with the mineral edge of the water. This is a good place to slow your thoughts. The Mono Basin does not ask you to solve it quickly. It offers forms that are understandable and mysterious at the same time. You can know the chemistry and still feel wonder. You can name calcium carbonate and still see moonlit towers rising from dark water like something dreamed by the earth in its sleep. And as we follow that dream farther from the shore, we come to the quiet life of the lake, moving around the towers without disturbing their rest. Mono Lake's life is small at first glance, but it is not scarce. If you kneel near the water, in imagination, you may notice movement in the shallows, tiny bodies flickering through the mineral brightness.
Brine shrimp drift and swim in delicate motions, feeding on microscopic algae suspended in the water. They are part of the lake's soft abundance, living in a world that feels strange but complete. The lake's salinity limits many fish and freshwater species, yet it supports organisms beautifully suited to its chemistry. Brine shrimp do not need reefs or forests. They need algae, water, and conditions they can tolerate. Alkali flies gather along the shore, sometimes in dark bands that lift when disturbed and settle again. Birds depend on this food, arriving during migrations and breeding seasons with quiet regularity.
You can imagine the Tufa towers beneath the old lake surface with shrimp moving around them like faint sparks. Not glowing, exactly, but catching light as they turn. The towers would have provided surfaces, shadows, and current breaks in the underwater landscape. Around their bases, chemistry, sediment, and life would overlap. The lake was not silent in the sense of emptiness. It was silent in the sense of balance. Algae in the water form the foundation for much of this ecosystem. They use sunlight near the surface, turning dissolved nutrients into living matter. Brine shrimp graze on them, and birds feed on the shrimp and flies. The whole system is simple enough to hold in the mind, yet vast enough to support great seasonal gatherings. You can feel how life here follows the lake's chemistry, rather than resisting it. The Tufa towers do not need to be alive to belong to the ecosystem. They shape space. They interrupt waves. They hold moisture in pores and shadows.
They give birds places to rest and mark shorelines where flies gather. Even when no longer growing, a tower remains part of the basin's living pattern because landscapes continue to participate after their first formation has ended. There is a soft lesson in that. A form made long ago can still offer shelter, texture, orientation, and beauty. It does not have to be active in the same way to matter. As you look across Mono Lake, the towers seem to hold this idea without effort. They stand quietly, and life moves around them, above them, through their shadows, and along their bases. The lake's smell becomes more noticeable near the shore.
It is mineral and salty, with traces of wet mud, algae, and sun-warmed stone. In cooler air, the scent thins and becomes cleaner, carried by wind over open water. You can breathe it in slowly, not as a fragrance exactly, but as a sign of place. Mono Basin has its own atmosphere, dry and saline and clear. At night, the living movement softens. Birds settle or pass overhead. The surface darkens. Small sounds become easier to hear because the wide basin holds them apart. Water touches Tufa with a careful sound, then withdraws. You can picture the lake under starlight, each tower pale at the edge, each ripple carrying a little darkness around the stone. The stars matter here because the basin's sky is wide. With few trees near the open shore, the horizon feels low, and the heavens seem to rest directly over the lake. Reflections tremble on the water when the surface is calm. The Tufa towers become silhouettes, and the Mono Basin feels suspended between mineral earth and starlit air. You are not falling asleep away from the place, but deeper into it. In that drowsy space, the science becomes almost like a lullaby. Calcium enters.
Water evaporates. Minerals remain. Springs rise. Stone gathers. None of it needs to be forced into drama, because the gentleness is the point. The landscape is beautiful because it lets small actions accumulate until they become visible enough to stand beside. And as the night settles more fully over Mono Lake, we turn toward the basin itself, the ancient hollow that held the water long enough for the towers to grow. The Mono Basin is a closed basin, a natural bowl where water collects but does not flow onward to the sea. This gives the lake its unusual character. Streams can enter, snowmelt can seep underground, storms can touch the surface, but there is no river carrying the dissolved minerals away.
The only regular exit is evaporation, and evaporation is a quiet, invisible gate. You can feel that closed quality in the landscape. Mountains and hills gather around the lake, not tightly, but enough to make the basin feel held. The air is dry, and distances look clean. Shadows stretch over volcanic slopes, pale flats, and dark water. When you stand there, You sense that the lake has been listening to its surroundings for a very long time, taking in everything and releasing only vapor. Closed basins often become saline because dissolved minerals stay behind as water leaves. This is not a flaw in the lake, it is the lake's identity. Mono Lake became alkaline and salty through the ordinary patience of climate and chemistry. Over time, the basin concentrated what the streams delivered. Then, in the right places, hidden freshwater springs added calcium and made the Tufa possible. The lake's elevation has changed many times. During wetter climatic periods, more water entered than evaporation removed, and the lake rose.
During drier periods, evaporation gained the advantage, and the lake fell. These changes created shorelines, terraces, wetlands, exposed flats, and submerged zones where tufa could form. You can picture the basin breathing slowly, water expanding and withdrawing over centuries. Those changing levels also controlled where tufa could grow. If a spring emerged beneath lake water and the chemistry was right, calcium carbonate could precipitate. If the lake fell below the vent, growth would stop or shift. If the lake rose, old towers might be submerged again, and new growth could occur around them. The towers are not just objects in the basin, they are responses to the lake's long breathing. The floor of the basin holds sediments from many sources.
Streams bring sand and silt, wind carries dust, volcanic eruptions in the region have contributed ash, organic matter settles from lake life. Layer by layer, the bottom records weather, water, fire, and biology. The Tufa towers rise from this layered floor like pale notes, held above a much longer score. You can imagine lowering your attention into that sediment. Fine particles settle through the water in slow descent. Some are mineral grains from distant slopes. Some are remains of algae or tiny organisms. Some are carbonate particles formed within the lake itself. They drift down in silence, landing softly, building the floor by increments too small to notice in a single evening. This settling is another kind of formation, quieter even than tufa. While towers grow around springs, the basin floor gathers the lake's suspended memory. Mud becomes archive. Layers hold clues to climate, chemistry, and life. The Mono Basin is not only a scenic place, it is a slow recorder, keeping information in stone, salt, sediment, and shoreline. As you rest beside it, you do not need to read every layer. It is enough to know they are there. The towers above the water and the sediments below it belong to the same patient system. One rises visibly, pale and textured. The other lies flat and dark beneath the lake. Both are made from time, and both invite you into a calmer way of noticing. The basin's volcanic features add depth to that archive. Dark islands, domes, and nearby craters remind us that the land has known heat and eruption. Yet those events have cooled into quiet forms, softened by distance and night. The Tufa towers, in contrast, were built by cool water and mineral precipitation. Fire shaped the container. Water wrote within it. This pairing makes the Mono Basin feel ancient without feeling heavy. It holds contrasts gently. Dryness and water, salt and snowmelt, volcanic rock and pale limestone, open sky and hidden springs. As your breathing slows, these contrasts stop pulling against each other and begin to feel like the natural rhythm of the place, the way shore and lake meet without needing to become the same. And as we remain within that basin, we let the old shorelines rise around us in the dark, each one marking where water once rested before moving on. The old shorelines of the Mono Basin are quiet marks, resting above the lake like faint memories left on stone. You might notice them as pale bands on distant slopes, or as terraces where waves once worked patiently at the edge of a higher lake. They do not call attention to themselves, but they change the way you see the whole basin. The water has been many shapes here, rising and lowering with climate, inflow and evaporation, while the Tufa towers waited in their mineral stillness. When the lake stood higher, the present shore was underwater, and many exposed Tufa towers were hidden below the surface. You can imagine walking now across dry ground that once belonged to the lake, with cool green water overhead and sunlight wavering down through suspended particles. The same sagebrush plain under your feet might have been lakebed, soft with sediment, crossed by springs, and touched by currents. In the Mono Basin, dryness and water trade places slowly, as if the landscape is breathing in geological sleep. Those former lake levels help explain why Tufa appears where it does. A spring alone is not enough, because the calcium-rich water must meet carbonate-rich lake water for the pale stone to gather. If the lake stands too low, the spring may emerge into air or shallow mud, and the tower cannot grow in the old submerged way. If the lake stands high enough, the spring can build upward into water, and the tower becomes a record of that meeting. You can let your attention rest on one tower and picture it at several different lake levels. At first, it is entirely underwater, a pale, rough form in green light, with spring water rising through its center or nearby vents. Later, its top nears the surface, where waves brighten the water and sunlight moves more strongly. Then, as the lake lowers, the crown appears above the surface, wet and shining in the sun, while the base remains below. Eventually, the whole tower stands in air, holding the shape of water it no longer touches. This is one of the gentle wonders of the Mono Basin. The visible landscape is not only present tense, it is layered with old conditions, old depths, and old chemical balances. You are not simply looking at stone beside a lake. You are looking at an immerged underwater place, a dry view of something born beneath water, and that reversal makes the Tufa towers feel dreamlike in the fading light. The basin's climate has helped shape these cycles for ages. Snow falls in the Sierra Nevada, melts in warmer months, and sends water toward the lake through streams and groundwater. Dry air, clear sun, and wind lift water back into the sky through evaporation. The balance between those two motions, arrival and departure, determines where the lake rests. You can feel that balance as a quiet tension across the open basin, though nothing about it feels hurried. In wet periods, more water enters the basin than leaves, and the lake rises across flats and around low features. In dry periods, evaporation removes more than inflow can replace, and the lake contracts inward. The shore migrates across the land, leaving behind beaches, terraces, and exposed mineral forms. The Tufa towers become markers in that movement, showing where hidden springs once worked beneath a different surface. They are calm evidence of change without any sharpness. The water itself would have felt different at different depths and seasons. Near the surface, it held warmth from the sun and motion from wind. Deeper down, it cooled and stilled with a heavier mineral quality and a dimmer light. Around spring vents, fresher water entered, perhaps cooler, perhaps clearer, making small zones where chemistry shifted. You can picture your hand moving through that water slowly, sensing layers that the eye might barely notice. Minerals do not need spectacle to become architecture. They need conditions, time, and a place to settle. At Mono Lake, the closed basin kept carbonate in the water, and the groundwater brought calcium upward through hidden paths. Together, they created limestone structures that look almost sculpted, though no hand shaped them. The towers rose from ordinary chemistry, repeated patiently, and that repetition is part of their piece. Even their irregular surfaces make sense when you imagine water moving around them. A current may favor one side, bringing fresh reactants or carrying away fine particles. A vent may shift slightly, building a ridge or hollow. A microbial film may provide a surface where minerals attach more easily. Sediment may bury part of the base, while another part remains open to flow. The tower grows as a collaboration between water, chemistry, life, and the shape it has already become. Standing now beside the lake, you see only the completed outer form, softened by air and weather. But if you close your eyes, the tower returns underwater. Light becomes green and diffuse. Sound becomes a low hush. The surface of Mono Lake above you wavers like a bright ceiling, while the spring breathes from below. You and I drift there quietly for a moment, watching stone gather from water. There is a kind of comfort in knowing that the tower did not have to understand itself. It simply formed where conditions allowed. It did not choose height, texture, or placement. Those came from the basin's slow circumstances. In the same way, The shorelines above us, the sediments below us, and the mineral scent in the air all belong to a process larger than any single moment. The Mono Basin holds these things together without needing to explain them quickly.
As we follow the old lake levels inward, the exposed shore becomes a threshold, and the present Tufa towers seem to stand between two worlds. The air around the exposed towers is dry and cool now, especially as evening settles. You can hear fine grit underfoot, the small shift of sand and salt crust as you move carefully along the shore. The towers rise with a pale roughness that catches low light, and their shadows fall unevenly across the ground. Each hollow seems darker than the last, as if the stone still keeps a little of its underwater shade. When water leaves Tufa exposed, weather begins to work on it in a new way. Rain enters pores and dries again. Wind carries dust into crevices.
Frost can touch the stone during cold nights and sun warms it through clear afternoons. These changes do not erase the tower quickly. They add another slow chapter to it, one written in air after the long chapter written in water. You can see how the surface responds. Some edges become rounded, some fragile points break away, some pores collect tiny sediments, salt, or traces of organic matter. The tower remains recognizably Tufa, but it is no longer only a product of underwater precipitation. It has become part of the shoreline weather, and the Mono Basin continues shaping it with every dry breeze and quiet season. The lake's chemistry also leaves marks near the waterline. Minerals may crust on stones where waves lap and evaporate. Wet surfaces dry pale. Mudflats can show thin salt patterns, delicate and temporary, altered by the next rise of water or passing rain. You can imagine kneeling beside the edge and seeing little geometries on the ground, smaller echoes of the larger mineral process that built the towers. The smell here is subtle but distinct.
Salt and alkali give the air a clean sharpness. Wet sediment adds a darker note. Sagebrush beyond the shore carries a dry green scent when the wind brushes through it. Your senses can rest in these layers, not needing to label each one too firmly, simply noticing that the Mono Basin has a fragrance as precise as its silence. The soundscape is equally spare. A small wave folds against the base of a tower. A bird calls from somewhere across the lake. Then the space between sounds opens again. Wind moves lightly over the surface, making a soft, grainy texture in the water. Even when there is motion, the basin feels quiet because everything has so much room around it. You hear distance as clearly as sound. This open space is part of the sleep of the place. Nothing presses close. The lake spreads outward. The mountains remain at the edge of vision. The towers stand with enough distance between them for shadows, reflections, and air. You can feel your own thoughts becoming less crowded, as if they are taking on the shape of the Mono Basin, wider and slower than before. The exposed towers show how much of landscape is revealed by absence. Lower water does not only remove a covering, it allows hidden forms to enter the visible world. A tower that grew unseen now becomes a landmark. A spring location becomes legible. A chemical process becomes stone you can walk around. The absence of water here is also a kind of disclosure. Yet the lake is still present in every detail. The tower's base may stand in dry sediment, but its shape belongs to water. Its chemistry belongs to the lake. Its height belongs to older levels. Even the light on its surface is reflected from the open water nearby. You are not looking at a dry object separated from the lake. You are looking at a lake form, standing for a while in air. That thought makes the shore feel gentler. The towers do not seem stranded. They seem paused between states. Some remain close to the water, some farther away, depending on shoreline history and local topography. If lake levels rise again, water can return around their bases, and reflections can climb their sides. The Mono Basin is always capable of rearranging the relationship between stone and surface. As we continue along this quiet margin, the towers guide us toward the hidden springs beneath them, where fresh water still seeks its way upward through the basin floor.
Beneath the visible shore, groundwater moves in darkness. It does not rush like a mountain stream in open air, but filters through cracks, sediments, and porous layers with slow persistence. You can imagine it feeling its way through the basin's buried materials, dissolving tiny amounts of calcium as it travels. It is cold in places, mineral in others, and always drawn by slope, pressure, and the shape of hidden pathways. This unseen motion is the source of Tufa's first gesture. The Sierra Nevada helps feed that underground water. Snowmelt enters streams, soils, talus and fractured rock. Then some portion continues below the surface instead of running directly to the lake. Along the way, it touches minerals and changes subtly. By the time it emerges beneath Mono Lake, it carries a chemical memory of its route. You can feel that connection as a line from snow to spring, from mountain coal to shoreline stone. Not every drop takes the same path. Some water arrives quickly through streams during melt seasons. Some moves slowly underground for much longer, buffered by rock and sediment. Some emerges near the lake edge, while some may rise beneath deeper water. The Tufa towers show where certain pathways became important enough to leave a mineral trace. They are pale signs of invisible roots. At the spring vent, fresh water enters a lake that is chemically different from itself. The contrast between the two waters is the beginning of precipitation. Calcium from the spring encounters carbonate in the lake, and calcium carbonate forms as a solid. That solid gathers around the vent, coating surfaces, narrowing openings, and sometimes building upward as water continues to flow through or around it. This can create chimney-like forms. The spring water may travel through a central passage, and minerals may deposit around the margins, slowly thickening the walls. Over time, the structure becomes more complex, because flow shifts as the tower grows. A small change in passage can redirect water, producing new ridges, lobes, or openings. You can picture the tower building itself while also altering the conditions of its own growth. That self-shaping is gentle but powerful. A mineral crust changes where water can go, a narrow opening can focus flow, a broad surface can catch more precipitate. The tower is not passive in a simple sense, because its new form influences the next layer that will form. Mono Lake and the spring continue the work together, making shapes that are both accidental and orderly. Microbial life may also influence tufa textures. Tiny living films can alter local chemistry, trap particles, or provide surfaces for minerals to attach. They do not carve the towers like tools, but they help create conditions at very small scales. The result can be branching, rough, or porous stone, full of texture that remembers both chemistry and life. You can lean close in imagination and feel that fine complexity under your fingertips. The Tufa towers are sometimes compared to towers, spires, knobs, or chimneys, yet each word only catches part of them. Some look architectural, as if they were built with intention, but their intention is only process. Some look organic, like ancient roots or coral, but they are lake limestone. Some look fragile from far away, then strong and heavy up close. Their shapes keep changing as you circle them slowly. From one side, a tower may appear narrow and elegant. From another, it may widen into a rough wall. Openings may frame pieces of lake and sky. Small shelves may hold shadows, dust, or resting birds. The more slowly you look, the less the tower seems like a single object, and the more it becomes a small landscape with cliffs, alcoves, valleys, and ledges of its own. The Mono Basin encourages this change in scale. A distant shore becomes a line, a tower becomes a ridge, a pore becomes a cave. Your attention can move from mountain ranges to mineral grains without leaving the same quiet place. Sleep comes easily to landscapes like this, because the mind has room to drift between large and small, always finding another gentle level below. Underwater, the scale would shift again. The tower would loom softly in green light, while tiny brine shrimp passed nearby. Mineral surfaces would catch drifting particles. Spring water might shimmer faintly where it entered the denser lake water, the way different temperatures or salinities sometimes bend light. You can imagine that subtle wavering, not dramatic, just a soft tremble at the edge of visibility. Water of different chemistry can mingle in delicate patterns.
The fresh spring water is less saline than the surrounding lake, and it may move differently as it rises. Mixing zones can be small and local, but they are where the mineral reaction becomes most active. The tower grows in that threshold, in the place where two bodies of water are becoming one another. There is something peaceful in that boundary, and as we leave the hidden spring for a while, we follow the mineral particles outward into the lake, where the whole basin becomes a slow vessel of concentration. Mono Lake's chemistry is shaped by what remains. Streams and springs bring dissolved material into the basin, but no outlet carries it away to another river or sea. Evaporation removes water molecules and leaves most salts behind. Over years, centuries, and longer spans, those remaining minerals define the lake's character. You can think of the lake as a quiet bowl of memory holding what the watershed has given it. This concentration makes the lake saline, but also alkaline. The water contains abundant carbonate and bicarbonate, which are central to tufa formation. Its chemistry can feel unusual to the skin, a little slippery, a little mineral, not like ordinary freshwater. If you dipped your hand into it, you might notice a soft smoothness, then the drying salt on your fingers afterward. The lake leaves a trace. That trace is part of the basin's identity. On rocks and mud near the shore, pale deposits may appear where lake water has evaporated. The same sunlight that warms your face helps lift water from the surface and concentrate the minerals below. Air, sun, and water collaborate silently. The Tufa towers depend on this wider chemical setting, because without carbonate-rich lake water, the spring calcium would not make the same stone. The clarity of the air makes the process feel even more visible. In the Mono Basin, light can travel cleanly across long distances, especially in the dry seasons. Mountains stand sharply at the horizon. The water reflects the sky with a brightness that seems almost mineral itself. The towers catch that light and return it softly, pale against blue, gray, or rose. Depending on the hour, wind also takes part. It crosses the lake, ruffling the surface, pushing water against shorelines, and mixing shallow areas. It can carry dust from exposed flats and shape the small textures of the land. On a calm evening, the wind nearly disappears, and the lake becomes reflective. On a breezier day, the same water grows textured and matte. You can feel both moods living inside the basin. Evaporation is strongest when the air is dry and warm, but it continues in many conditions. It is a quiet departure, invisible except in what it leaves behind. No stream marks its path. No channel shows where the water went. It rises into air and becomes part of clouds, weather, and distant cycles, while the lake keeps the salts. The absence itself changes the chemistry. This is why closed basins often feel contemplative. They gather, they hold, they transform what arrives instead of passing it along quickly. Mono Lake has been doing this through long spans of climate change, tectonic shaping, volcanic activity, and seasonal variation. The Tufa towers are among the most visible signs of that gathering. Pale sculptures made possible by retention and time. You can imagine a single dissolved iron entering the lake through a stream, too small to see, drifting through alkaline water, remaining as evaporation removes the water around it. Another arrives, then another. The lake becomes gradually enriched, not in a way the eye can notice day by day, but in a way that matters deeply over long periods. Later, at a spring vent, those invisible presences become visible limestone. There is something restful about processes that do not need to be watched continuously. You can leave them for years, and they continue. Snow falls, water moves, minerals dissolve, evaporation concentrates, springs rise, tufa gathers. The Mono Basin becomes a lesson in slow continuity, a place where the small repeated action is not small at all, when given enough patience. At the shoreline, this continuity takes on color and texture. The mud may be dark where wet, pale where dry, crusted with salts in delicate patches. The tufa may be bright on sunlit faces and gray in shaded hollows. The water may shift from transparent shallows to deeper blue-green a little farther out. Each transition is gradual, like a voice lowering itself for night. As we move through this mineral quiet,
the lake's living rhythms return, surrounding the towers with small motions that have repeated across countless seasons. The brine shrimp of Mono Lake are modest creatures, but in great numbers they become one of the lake's defining presences. They move through the water with tiny rhythmic strokes, grazing on algae and drifting in loose clouds. You might not notice them from far away, yet they help hold the lake's food web together. Around the Tufa towers, their motion would have added a faint, living sparkle to the green water. Alkali flies are equally woven into the shoreline. They gather where water meets land, feeding and breeding in ways suited to the lake's unusual chemistry. Their bodies can trap a thin layer of air, allowing them to move underwater briefly near the surface.
To a sleepy observer, they might appear as a dark, shifting edge along the shore, lifting and settling with the softest disturbance. Birds come to Mono Lake because this small life is abundant. They may feed, rest, nest, or pause during long migrations. The lake offers nourishment in a dry region where such abundance can feel almost secret. You can hear distant calls across the water and imagine wings passing over Tufa at dusk, their reflections briefly crossing the pale stone and then fading. The towers themselves are not the food, yet they belong to the pattern. They provide perches, shelter from wind in small pockets, and complexity along the shore. Their shadows change how the eye reads the water.
Their bases interrupt waves and collect little lines of floating material. A landscape does not need to feed life directly to shape its movements, and the Tufa towers do this quietly. Algae are the beginning of much of that abundance. They use sunlight in the upper water, growing in response to nutrients, temperature, and season. Brine shrimp graze on them, and the shrimp in turn feed birds. The simplicity of this chain is calming. It does not feel empty. It feels clear, like a few soft notes repeated in different weather. You can rest in that quality. Seasonal changes alter the mood of the lake without breaking its stillness. In spring, snow melt increases the sense of renewal from the mountains. In summer, evaporation and light intensify the mineral brightness. In autumn, migrating birds may gather, and the air sharpens. In winter, cold settles over the basin, and the towers stand pale under a quieter sky. Each season touches the same forms differently. You can picture the Tufa towers through those seasons. Frost may whiten them before morning light. Summer sun may make them almost luminous. Autumn clouds may darken the lake behind them. A winter storm may blur the mountains and make the towers seem closer, their pale shapes emerging from grey water. The towers do not move, but the world around them turns slowly, and they receive each change. This receiving quality is part of their beauty. They do not act dramatically. They stand. They hold light, shadow, moisture, dryness, bird tracks, salt dust, and silence. They hold the memory of underwater formation and the present life of the shore. You can sit beside them for a long while and feel that standing still can be a form of attention. In the old submerged world, their stillness would have been different. Water would have slowed every movement around them. Brine shrimp would pass in small pulses. Particles would descend through dim light. Spring water would rise through hidden passages. The tower would grow not by reaching actively upward, but by allowing mineral matter to gather where the conditions were right. There is no need to make the deep lake frightening. It is simply quieter, greener, and more enclosed. The pressure is gentle at these depths, the light softened, the sounds muted. You can feel the water around you as a calm presence, holding everything without urgency. The Mono Basin's underwater past is not a place of danger in this telling. It is a place of formation. As the living lake moves around these pale forms, we begin to sense how every tower is both a local feature and part of a much wider basin story. The Mono Basin has been shaped by tectonic forces, volcanic activity, climate shifts, and water chemistry, but tonight, those large words can settle into softer images. The land has opened into a basin. Volcanic hills have cooled under the sky. Snow has fallen on distant peaks. Streams have carried minerals downward. A lake has gathered and concentrated them. Springs have risen, and Tufa towers have grown in silence. Tectonic movement helped create the basin's broad depression. Over long spans,
the crust stretched and shifted, making room for closed basins across the region. You do not need to picture anything abrupt. Think instead of the land slowly changing posture, lowering here, lifting there, allowing water to gather in hollows. Mono Lake rests within such a hollow, and the Tufa towers are possible because the basin holds water in place. Volcanism adds another quiet layer.
Darker islands and nearby volcanic features remind us that the region once released heat from below. Ash, lava, and domes became part of the basin's geology. Over time, they cooled, weathered, and joined the broader landscape. Against these darker volcanic forms, the pale tufa can seem especially luminous, like mineral foam frozen at the edge of a dream. The Sierra Nevada, meanwhile, rises as a source of snow and water. Its high slopes gather winter storms, and in warmer months that stored water moves downslope. Some of it becomes visible streams, some enters the ground, some eventually reaches Mono Lake. The towers at the shore are connected to those high cold places, even though they stand in dry, open air far below. This connection makes the tufa feel less isolated. A tower is not just made at the shore, it is made by the watershed. Mountain weather, rock chemistry, groundwater flow, lake concentration, and evaporation all meet inside it. You can stand beside one pale column and sense an entire landscape gathered there, from granite peaks to lake mud, from snowflake to limestone pour. The closed basin makes that gathering intimate.
In an open river system, dissolved minerals may travel onward toward another valley, another river, and eventually the ocean. Here they remain. Mono Lake holds them close, transforming them through concentration and reaction. The basin becomes a slow room of chemistry, and the tufa towers are the sculptures that form where hidden springs open into that room. Time is the largest ingredient, though it leaves no taste in the water. Without time, snowmelt is just water, carbonate is just dissolved matter, and a spring vent is only a seep. With time, repeated meetings become stone. Small precipitates become walls. Walls become towers. Towers become landmarks.
The Mono Basin turns repetition into presence, and that presence is what you feel on the quiet shore. You may notice how the mind relaxes when it follows a process this slow. There is no single moment that must be grasped. There is only a sequence of gentle causes, each one understandable, each one moving into the next. The lake does not hurry to become itself. The tower does not hurry to rise. Your thoughts, listening to this, do not have to hurry either. The colors continue to dim. Pale stone becomes blue-gray, dark water becomes nearly black, but still reflective where the sky touches it. The mountains lose detail and become broad shapes around the basin. You can feel the cooling ground through the soles of your feet, and the air brushes your face with the dry softness of a high desert evening. As darkness deepens, the geological story becomes less visible and more felt, and the tufa towers become quiet companions at the edge of sleep. In the dark, the towers are no longer detailed objects. They are shapes, pale where they catch starlight, dark where their hollows turn inward.
You may still know their surfaces are rough, but your eyes no longer need every pore. The mind fills them gently with memory, with the thought of calcium carbonate, submerged springs, old shorelines, and slow water. Mono Basin becomes less a view and more a presence. At night, sound carries differently across open water. A distant bird may seem both near and far. A small wave may repeat against stone with almost measured softness. Wind may move through dry plants behind you, then fade again. These sounds do not interrupt the quiet. They deepen it, because each one appears inside a large surrounding stillness, and then dissolves back into it. The tufa towers formed in silence, and they remain suited to silence.
Their pale bodies do not need daylight to be themselves. In darkness, they seem to return to their underwater origins, to the dim condition where shape mattered more than color. You can imagine the lake rising around them again, slowly covering the bases, then the shoulders, then the crowns, until the towers are held in green quiet. This imagined submergence is restful. It is not a flood or a forceful return. It is simply water finding its old level in the mind. The shore softens. The air cools into water. The sky becomes a wavering ceiling. The tower stands beside you beneath the surface, rough and pale, while small particles drift downward. Everything is slowed by the lake. The science remains the same in this dreamlike view. Fresh groundwater brings calcium. Alkaline lake water holds carbonate. The meeting forms calcium carbonate. Layer upon layer, the mineral gathers. But as sleep approaches, the words themselves become softer, less like explanation, and more like a rhythm of exchange. The basin teaches through repetition. Water enters, water leaves. Minerals remain, stone grows. You can carry that rhythm into your breathing. Inhale like snowmelt entering the basin. Exhale like evaporation rising into clear air. Pause like minerals staying behind in the lake. Then breathe again, and let the tower form slowly somewhere below thought. The Mono Basin is especially suited to this kind of inward quiet, because its visible beauty comes from processes too patient to demand attention. The exposed shore under starlight may feel almost lunar, but it is deeply earthly. It holds mud, salt, bird tracks, plant roots, old wave marks, and mineral towers born from lake water. The surface may look spare, yet it is filled with relationship. Every pale structure is tied to hidden water. Every dry terrace is tied to former waves. Every scent in the air belongs to the basin. You do not need to move quickly through it. A slow walk is enough. A slower gaze is better. The Tufa towers change as you pass them, revealing openings, curves, rough walls, and small shadows that were hidden a few steps before. Your body learns their pace. You stop expecting immediate revelation, and the place begins to show itself in quiet increments. That is also how Tufa formed, through increments. Not through grand gestures, but through small additions that mattered because they continued. The lake did not have to make a tower all at once. It only had to sustain the meeting of waters. Given enough seasons, the tiny mineral decisions became visible columns. The lesson is not spoken by the stone, but it is there. As we continue beneath the darkening sky, the towers lead us toward the idea of patience made visible, and the basin grows quieter around every breath. Patience in the Mono Basin is not passive. It is active in a nearly invisible way. Water moves through stone. Minerals dissolve. Evaporation concentrates. Springs rise. Calcium carbonate settles. Each action is small, but none is empty. Together they make the forms you see along the shore, and those forms make patience feel solid enough to touch. You can place your imagination near the base of a tower and sense the long work beneath it. The mud holds old sediment. The spring once found a path upward. The lake surrounded that path with carbonate-rich water. Precipitation began at the boundary, then continued in layers. The tower rose because conditions returned again and again. Not perfectly, but often enough. Its height is a memory of persistence. The word formation can sound finished, as if the tower simply came into being and stopped. But in landscapes, formation often overlaps with alteration. The tufa grew underwater, emerged into air, weathered under sun, hosted birds, caught salt dust, and reflected in shifting lake levels. It is still participating in the basin. Its first process may have slowed, but its presence continues to shape the shore. This is true of many geological wonders, though each has its own pace and material. A canyon deepens by water and sediment. A glacier shapes rock by ice and gravity. A salt flat forms as water vanishes and minerals crystallize. Here in the Mono Basin, Tufa rises from the meeting of waters, making the invisible chemistry of a lake visible as pale stone. Because the towers are exposed, they allow us to imagine underwater time without needing to descend. You stand in air and see a structure made below water. You walk among forms that once belonged to the lake bed. This reversal is gently disorienting. It makes the shoreline feel like a lifted veil, a place where the bottom of a former world has become the present surface. The dry ground around the towers may crunch faintly as you step. There may be little shells, mineral crusts, or fine sediments arranged by old water and recent wind. Low plants hold their distance from the saltiest ground. The lake breathes nearby with small waves. Every detail speaks softly of thresholds,
where wet becomes dry, submerged becomes exposed, and hidden becomes seen. The towers themselves keep the calm authority of things made without hurry. They do not lean into spectacle. They do not need height alone to impress you. Even a small Tufa mound can feel complete, because it records the same meeting as a larger spire. Scale matters less than process. A thumb-sized crust and a tall tower are relatives in the same mineral family. If you look carefully at smaller tufa forms, you may see bulbous textures, branching nodules, and delicate ridges. These details reveal how unevenly water and minerals moved. Growth was not a smooth coating applied from outside. It was a textured response to flow, chemistry, and available surfaces. The tower's roughness is a record of contact, where water touched stone and became more stone. This makes the Mono Basin feel intimate despite its wide horizons. The mountains and sky are large, but the tower surface asks for close attention. You can move from horizon to handspan, from the whole basin to a single hollow in limestone. The mind follows this movement easily at night, drifting from broad calm into finer calm, always descending into another layer of noticing. And as your attention narrows, the basin's history opens again, because even the smallest pore belongs to the movement of entire watersheds. A pore in Tufa is not an empty detail. It may mark where gas, organic material, water flow, or mineral growth once left space behind. It may be part of a network of openings, formed as carbonate accumulated unevenly. When you see that small darkness in the stone, you are seeing a trace of former conditions, a tiny chamber left by change. Many pores together give Tufa its lightweight, rough appearance. They scatter light and create shadows. They make the surface look aged, almost bone-like, though the stone is mineral rather than bone. When the low sun touches such a surface, every opening catches a little darkness, and every ridge glows. The tower becomes a map of small contrasts, all made by water that moved too slowly to hear. In an underwater setting, those pores and openings would have affected flow. Water could move through and around them, bringing fresh reactants, carrying dissolved material, and creating microenvironments. The tower was not sealed from the lake. It was permeable, textured, and responsive. You can imagine currents entering tiny passages and leaving again, each one participating in the tower's continuing form. Some openings may be large enough to frame pieces of sky now. When you look through them from the shore, you see lake, mountain, or twilight held inside stone. This is one of the quiet pleasures of exposed tufa. A feature formed underwater now becomes a window in air. The old lake chemistry frames the present world, and the basin looks back at you through its own mineral history. The towers can also appear clustered, as if several springs worked near one another, or as if growth expanded around connected vents. In a cluster, the spaces between towers matter as much as the towers themselves. They create narrow passages for wind, shadow, and reflected light. You can walk your gaze through those spaces slowly, noticing how absence shapes the visual rhythm of the group. At the lake edge, reflected towers tremble with each ripple. The reflection is darker and softer than the stone above, and it breaks into long wavering fragments when wind moves across the surface. This reflection reminds you that the tower still belongs partly to water, even when standing in air. The lake keeps making a second version of it, temporary, fluid, and unable to hold still. That temporary version is beautiful because it cannot be preserved. A ripple changes it. A breeze erases it. Calm restores it in another form. The solid tower and the moving reflections sit together, one made by ancient water, the other made by present water. You can rest between them, letting permanence and change become less separate in your mind. The Mono Basin offers many such pairings. Dry shore and wet lake, pale tufa and dark volcanic hills, snow-fed streams and saline water, harsh-looking chemistry and abundant specialized life. The place is not simple, yet it feels calm because its contrasts have lived together for so long. You can feel that long coexistence as a steady balance. As we linger beside the reflected towers, the story shifts toward light, because every hour changes how the tufa appears without changing what it is. Morning light on the tufa towers is clear and revealing. It touches the high ridges first, then slowly fills hollows and rough shelves. The lake brightens from gray to blue,
and the mountains become more detailed along the horizon. You might hear birds beginning to move, their calls crossing the open water with a fresh softness. The towers seem awake, but only because the light has changed. At midday, the sun can flatten shadows and make the pale stone almost brilliant. The water may look sharper, the salt crusts brighter, the dry flats more exposed. Heat may rise from the ground in faint wavering sheets. Even then, the towers keep their slow character. Their surfaces may glare, but their story remains calm, written in underwater mineral growth and old lake levels. Evening is often the gentlest time. Shadows lengthen across the basin, and the Tufa takes on warmer tones. The water darkens by degrees. The towers stand between sky colors and the approaching cool of night. You can feel the day letting go without drama, as if the whole Mono Basin is lowering its voice. This is when the forms seem most ancient. Under moonlight, the towers change again. Their pale surfaces may gather a faint glow, while hollows remain dark. The lake becomes a sheet of dim metal if the wind is calm. The surrounding land loses color and becomes shape. You can walk in imagination very slowly here, seeing just enough to feel guided, while the rest of the basin opens into soft obscurity. Light matters to the viewer, but not to the tower's original growth in quite the same way. Tufa formation depends more on chemistry, water movement and the meeting of spring and lake, yet light supports the lake's algae, and algae support the living web around the towers. It also lets us notice form, texture, and color. Light is not the builder alone, but it is the revealer. The old underwater light would have been filtered and greenish. Sunbeams entering Mono Lake would scatter in mineral-rich water, reaching the tower in a softened form. Waves above would break the light into moving bands across the Tufa surface. A tower growing there would never appear hard-edged in the way it does in dry air. It would be wrapped in shimmer, shadow, and suspended particles. You can imagine that shimmer now as a sleep image. The tower rises from the lakebed. Fine material drifts downward. Brine shrimp move through the water. Spring water threads upward through the carbonate-rich lake. Mineral gathers along a roughening surface. Light slides over everything and then fades with depth. Nothing is urgent. Everything is held in motion too slow to disturb rest. This is the deep water feeling of Mono Basin, even though we stand on land. The towers invite us below the former surface. They remind us that landscapes can carry submerged memories into dry air. They let the mind sink, not into an ocean trench, but into an inland lake's mineral past, where darkness was gentle and formation was continuous. As the light fades once more, we follow that submerged memory into the denser quiet below the old surface, where the tower's base met sediment and spring water. At the base of a forming Tufa tower, the lake bed would have been soft with sediment in many places. Fine particles settled there, layer upon layer, from streams, algae, dust, and carbonate formation. A spring vent might open through this softness, sending clearer water upward. Around it, mineral precipitation could begin, making the first hard surfaces in an otherwise yielding floor. The tower's foundation was a threshold. The sediment mattered because it shaped where water could emerge. Groundwater follows pathways through permeable layers, fractures, and openings. If sediment clogged one route, water might find another. If a vent stayed open, mineral could continue building around it. The Tufa Tower therefore reflects not only lake chemistry, but the hidden structure beneath the lake bed. You can picture the unseen ground as a quiet network of possible paths. Over time, as carbonate accumulated, the tower could rise above surrounding sediment, becoming more prominent in the underwater landscape. Its sides might catch drifting particles. Its base might become partially buried or exposed depending on currents and deposition. The growing form altered flow around itself, creating tiny sheltered zones where more material could settle. The tower and the lake bed shaped one another in return. This reciprocity feels important.
Nothing in the Mono Basin acts entirely alone. The spring needs the lake.
The lake needs the basin needs mountains, climate, and time to become what it is. Even the tower, which looks so singular in a photograph or from a distance, is really a meeting place. It is a form made by relationships that stayed steady long enough to become visible. The base of the tower may now be exposed, surrounded by dry sediment, salt crust, or shallow water depending on lake level. You can stand beside it and imagine the older lake bed beneath your feet. What is firm enough to walk on may once have received falling particles in silence. What is dry now may once have held cool water and the dim scent of minerals. The shore is full of reversals. If you listen inwardly, you might hear the old lake rather than the present wind, the soft sound of suspended matter settling, the faint movement of brine shrimp, the muted push of water around limestone surfaces, the spring rising through the vent, not loudly, but with enough persistence to feed a tower. These imagined sounds are quiet because the process itself was quiet.
The chemistry at the base could be especially active where spring water first entered the lake. Fresh, calcium-rich water met alkaline lake water and carbonate minerals formed around the vent. Depending on flow, the inner passages might remain open while outer walls thickened. This is how a chimney can grow, not by solid filling alone, but by mineral deposition around moving water. The tower is shaped by the path it preserves. As that path changes, the tower's texture changes. A blocked channel may force water sideways. A new opening may begin to build a secondary column. A broader seep may create a mound rather than a narrow spire. Variation is not a flaw.
It is the tower's record of adjustment, a mineral memory of how water found its way through changing conditions. In this way, tufa formation is both precise and soft. The chemistry is specific. Calcium carbonate forms under certain conditions, yet the final shapes are irregular, responsive, and almost tender in their unevenness. You can know the formula and still be surprised by the form. That is one of the reasons the Mono Basin holds attention so gently, even when the body is ready for sleep. As we rest near the old base of the tower, the lake bed seems to widen around us, and the basin's long sediments begin to speak in softer layers. Sediment settles without announcement. A grain falls through water, touches the lake floor, and becomes part of a layer. Another follows, then many more, from streams, wind, biological activity, and chemical precipitation. Over long periods, these layers can hold the memory of wet and dry climates, volcanic ashfalls, changing salinity, and biological abundance. The lake floor becomes a book written too slowly to read in one glance.
Mono Basin sediments can include material washed from the Sierra, dust from dry lands, ash from volcanic events, and carbonate particles formed within the lake. Each source gives the basin another texture. You can imagine the lake receiving all of it without judgment, letting heavy grains settle quickly and fine particles drift farther. The Tufa towers rise from this receiving floor, their harder forms emerging from a softer archive. When the lake level changes, some sediments are exposed to air. Mudflats dry and crack. Shoreline deposits become terraces. Old lake beds become walking surfaces.
What was once underwater becomes part of the visible desert landscape. You can feel that transformation beneath you. A ground that may look ordinary until you remember it once lay under mineral water and dim light. The towers help your mind make that shift. Because they so clearly formed underwater, they make the surrounding dryness feel temporary, or at least incomplete. The present shore is not the whole truth. It is one phase in a long oscillation. Water has been higher, water has been lower. The tufa has been hidden, revealed, reflected, dried and touched again by waves. This long oscillation gives the Mono Basin its dreamlike calm. The lake does not hold one fixed outline forever. It responds to climate, inflow, evaporation, and human decisions, always adjusting its edge. Yet the basin remains itself through those changes. The mountains still gather around it. The sky still opens above it. The towers still keep their pale memory. Even the word basin suggests holding. It does not imply motion away, but collection, containment, and slow transformation. You can imagine the land as cupped hands, receiving snowmelt, spring water, minerals, dust, sunlight, and birds.
Inside those hands, Mono Lake changes what it receives. It concentrates, feeds, reflects, and builds. The Tufa Towers are among the most visible gifts of that held water. A lake with no outlet becomes intimate with its own contents. Nothing dissolved leaves easily. The chemistry grows distinctive. Life adapts to that distinctiveness. Stone forms where fresh and saline waters meet. The Mono Basin is therefore not isolated in a lonely way, but concentrated in a contemplative way. It turns inward, and by turning inward, it becomes unlike any ordinary passing lake. This inwardness can be felt in the night air. The lake lies quiet, holding the reflections of stars. The towers stand around it like mineral thoughts. The mountains enclose without crowding.
You can breathe slowly and feel how closed does not have to mean trapped. Here, closed means held long enough for subtle things to happen, long enough for water to become stone. As we follow this held water through another quiet season, the basin's changing weather begins to pass over the towers, touching them gently without hurrying them. Winter in the Mono Basin can bring cold clarity. Snow may rest on surrounding mountains, while the lake remains dark and mineral below. The Tufa Towers stand pale against a subdued landscape, their rough surfaces touched by frost or thin snow in sheltered places. The air feels clean and sharp, and sound carries far. You can imagine each breath appearing briefly, then fading into stillness. In this season, snow is stored in the high country. It waits on slopes, in gullies, and beneath wind-shaped drifts. Later, some of that snow will melt and move toward the lake, feeding streams and groundwater. Even in winter quiet, the next part of the Tufa story is being prepared. The basin rests, but the watershed is not inactive. It is simply working at the pace of cold. Spring brings movement from the mountains. Meltwater runs through creeks and seeps into ground. Plants near fresher water green briefly. Birds return or pass through. The lake receives new inflow, and the balance with evaporation shifts. You can hear more life in the air, but the feeling remains soft, because the basin's openness spreads every sound into spaciousness. The towers stand in that renewal with patience. Summer is brighter and drier. Sunlight intensifies on pale tufa and exposed flats. Evaporation strengthens, lifting water invisibly into the warm air. The lake's mineral nature becomes more noticeable near the shore, and salt patterns may appear where wet ground dries. You can feel heat radiating from the land, but near evening, coolness returns from the mountains, and the towers release the day slowly. Autumn often brings a sense of gathering. Light lowers. Air becomes clearer. Migratory birds may use the lake's abundance before continuing onward. The water reflects the changing sky, and the Tufa Towers take on warm tones at sunset. Everything feels poised between fullness and rest. You can stand there and sense the Mono Basin preparing to quiet again, though its processes continue beneath the seasonal surface. Across all seasons, the towers remain steady enough to give the eye a place to rest. Weather passes, birds come and go, water levels shift, shadows change. The towers keep their mineral form, not unchanged in an absolute sense, but stable in the way old things can be stable, while still participating in the world. Their slowness makes the surrounding changes feel gentle. This steadiness is why they suit a sleep story so well. They are not lifeless decorations. They are patient records. They hold an origin in underwater chemistry, a present in shoreline weather, and a future in whatever the lake and climate bring next. You can let your thoughts lean against them, the way moonlight leans against pale stone, softly and without effort. As the seasons pass over Mono Lake, we return again to the tower's origin, because every visible surface leads back to that first meeting of waters. The first layer of tufa around a spring vent may have been thin enough to miss, a pale film on sediment, a crust on a submerged surface, a slight roughness where water chemistry changed. You would not have called it a tower then.
you might not have called it anything.
Yet that first layer mattered, because it offered a surface for the next, and the next, and the next arrival. Growth by accumulation is quiet but profound. The tower does not leap upward. It thickens, extends, branches, and responds. Water still flows. Minerals still precipitate. Surfaces become more complex, and complexity invites further deposition. Over time, a small mineral fringe becomes a mound, and a mound becomes a column. The difference between beginning and tower is made of many moments too small to hold individually. This is why the exposed tufa can feel ancient even when specific features formed within changing lake histories. The process itself belongs to deep patterns of water and chemistry. It has kinship with limestone caves, hot spring terraces, coral reef cementation, and other mineral precipitations, though Mono Lake's version is distinctly its own. Here, the closed basin, alkaline water, and calcium-rich springs create a particular beauty. You can imagine the tower growing in darkness through nights no one saw. Stars moved over the lake, winds crossed the surface.
Birds slept on distant shores. Beneath it all, spring water continued to rise and mineral continued to gather. The tower's growth did not depend on daylight attention. It belonged to the hidden hours as much as to the visible ones. There is a comforting equality in that. The landscape is not more real when watched. It continues when the shore is empty, when clouds cover the stars, when winter cold settles over the basin, and when no footstep marks the flats. Mono Basin's Tufa towers grew from processes that did not need witness, and perhaps that is why they feel so calm when we finally see them. As you grow sleepier, the details can soften without disappearing. Calcium remains calcium. Carbonate remains carbonate. The spring remains a spring.
The lake remains a closed mineral basin, but the mind does not need to hold every term sharply. It can let them become images: mountain snow, hidden water, alkaline lake, pale stone, open sky, and the quiet shore. The tower itself becomes a kind of slow candle in the dark. Though it does not burn, it gathers moonlight instead of flame. It stands where water once covered it. It holds hollows like pockets of shadow. Around it the lake breathes at the edge of hearing. You can rest near that image, letting the Mono Basin widen and dim around you in silence. And as we continue, the shore beneath us seems to lower again in imagination, returning us to the submerged basin, where the Tufa was still quietly rising. The submerged basin receives us without sharpness, as if the old water has risen around our ankles, then our hands, then our quiet shoulders. The exposed shore becomes lake bed again, and the Tufa towers stand in their first element, pale and rough in the greenish dim. Above, the surface of Mono Lake wavers with softened light, while below, spring water continues its patient upward motion. You can feel the scene becoming slower as water gathers around every thought. Down here, sound is not gone, but it is changed. The wind that crossed the open basin becomes only a faint pressure above the surface. Waves are translated into gentle movement. The world feels close around your skin, cool and mineral, with the muted softness of water holding everything in place. A Tufa tower rises nearby, not as a monument, but as a quiet consequence of contact between fresh water and lake water. The tower's surface is alive with texture, though not in a hurried way. There are small ridges where minerals gathered more strongly, hollows where flow shifted, and porous pockets where water once moved through delicate openings. Suspended particles drift past like slow dust in a beam of light. You can imagine reaching out, not touching, only sensing the cool roughness of the limestone with your eyes. The Mono Basin feels hidden here, even while it is fully present. At the spring vent, the chemistry continues its soft work. Calcium-rich groundwater enters the alkaline lake and meets carbonate waiting in solution. The calcium carbonate that forms is not dramatic, only persistent, settling onto surfaces and thickening them by increments. The tower grows because this meeting repeats. It grows because the basin allows the ingredients to remain, gather, and return. You can breathe with that repetition and feel your body quieting. The water around a Tufa tower would never be perfectly still. Tiny currents move around the form, guided by the tower's own ridges and openings. Spring water rises. Lake water shifts with wind and temperature. Brine shrimp, pass through the softer light, and fine mineral particles settle around the base. But every motion is softened by depth, and nothing breaks the hush of formation. If you look upward from beside the tower, the lake surface is a wavering ceiling. Daylight enters through it in trembling bands, then breaks across the mineral shape below. Some rays slide along ridges, some vanish into green shadow. The tower receives this light unevenly, becoming bright in one place and dim in another. It is easy to understand why exposed tufa feels like a memory of water, because even in air, it seems shaped by shimmer. The base of the tower disappears into sediment. There, the spring's path may be hidden under fine mud, old ash, carbonate grains, and organic particles settling from above. The tower seems to rise from softness, yet its root is a moving point of groundwater. It is both anchored and flowing. You can rest with that paradox, because the Mono Basin is full of such quiet pairings, firm stone born from moving water. Around us, the lake's living world continues in small gestures. Brine shrimp move with transparent bodies and rhythmic limbs, grazing where algae have grown in the upper light. Alkali flies keep closer to the margins, where shore and water meet, yet their life is tied to the same chemical lake. Birds above the surface depend on this abundance, though from here they are only shadows passing over the wavering ceiling. The tower stands within a web. This living web does not disturb the calm. It completes it. A lake that appears spare from far away can hold dense seasonal life, all fitted to its mineral character. You can imagine the shrimp as tiny drifting commas in the water, moving between particles, light, and stone. Their scale is so small beside the tower, and the tower is so small beside the basin. Yet all belong to the same quiet system. As we remain below the old surface, the tufa begins to feel less like an object and more like a slow event still unfolding around us. A slow event is different from a finished thing. The tower is the visible result, but formation is the deeper story. Water approaches, chemistry shifts, mineral appears, and form develops. Each part depends on the last, and none announces itself loudly. You can think of the Tufa Tower as a verb held in stone, a long act of becoming that the Mono Basin has allowed to pause in visible form. The lake's alkalinity matters here in a gentle but essential way. Carbonate and bicarbonate in the water create the chemical setting for calcium carbonate to form when calcium arrives. Without that lake chemistry, the spring water would not build the same pale structures. The closed basin, evaporation, and long concentration of dissolved minerals prepare the water for this meeting. Mono Lake is not just the backdrop, it is the partner. The spring is the other partner. It brings fresh water from underground roots, often cooler and less saline than the surrounding lake. It carries calcium gathered along its hidden path. When it rises, it creates a small local difference in the lake, a place where mixing happens and minerals can leave solution. The tower forms along this boundary, where two waters briefly remain distinct enough to make stone. You can picture the boundary as invisible lace. It is not a wall, but a shifting zone of contact, bending with flow and widening as waters mingle. Minerals gather where conditions cross a threshold. That threshold moves slightly with every pulse of spring water and every motion of the lake. Over time, the moving boundary leaves behind a solid, irregular, beautiful trace. This is why Tufa towers can look both orderly and wild. The chemistry follows rules, but the water moves through real spaces with sediment, organisms, vents, and changing currents. No tower is a perfect cylinder because no spring, lake bed, or current stays perfectly uniform. The irregularity is not disorder in a harsh sense. It is the signature of a living physical world, working softly through conditions. The Mono Basin's towers seem almost sculptural now because water levels have exposed them, but when they formed, their shapes were functional in the quiet language of flow. Passages carried spring water, outer surfaces received minerals. Openings formed where growth surrounded spaces and left them unfilled. Later, air and sunlight turned these hidden forms into landmarks. You are seeing underwater function as shoreline beauty. There is comfort in remembering that beauty can emerge from utility without intention. The tower did not set out to be beautiful. The basin did not arrange itself for viewing. The chemical process had no audience in mind. Yet the result is graceful, because natural forms often become graceful when matter and time work together without hurry. You can let that thought settle as gently as sediment. From within the imagined old lake, the tower's height feels different. It does not rise into sky, but into water. Its top may be closer to brighter surface light, while its lower parts rest in dimmer green. Small differences in depth change temperature, movement, and illumination. The tower becomes a vertical record within the lake, touching several watery zones at once. Its body is a measure of submerged time. As we drift upward along the tower, the surface light grows faintly stronger, and the old lake around Mono Basin opens into a wider green silence. Near the tower's upper reaches, the water is brighter. Ripples above scatter sunlight into wandering lines that move over Tufa ridges and then slide away. The stone seems to breathe with light, though it remains still. Tiny particles flash briefly as they pass through brighter bands. You can feel your own thoughts rising and falling with those bands, held in the gentle rhythm of the lake. At this depth, wind at the surface matters more. When air moves across Mono Lake, it pushes ripples and small waves, and those waves send soft motions downward. The tower receives the movement along its sides. Water curls around protrusions and quiets in sheltered hollows. These small currents influence where particles settle and how dissolved ingredients arrive. Even a breeze, translated through water, becomes part of the tower's shaping. The lake surface also controls how light enters. Calm water sends clearer reflections and steadier shafts below. Rougher water scatters light into broken patterns. Clouds dim the whole scene. Season and time of day shift the color. The tufa does not depend on light in the same direct way that algae do, but light changes how the underwater world feels to us, and it shapes the life moving around the tower. Algae in the upper water gather sunlight into living matter. They are simple in appearance, yet they support the brine shrimp that support birds across the basin. Their presence may tint the water and affect clarity, giving the lake its living color. You can imagine greenish light, not as emptiness, but as the glow of microscopic abundance suspended throughout the water. The tower stands quietly inside that living medium. Brine shrimp graze in this realm, their small bodies pulsing through the water. They do not need to be large to be important. In numbers, they become a bridge between sunlight and wings, between algae and birds. Around the tufa, they move through openings of light and shadow, never altering the tower dramatically, yet making the lake feel inhabited. Their delicate movement adds softness to the mineral scene. Above, birds may gather on the surface, float near shore, or pass across the basin in long seasonal rhythms. From underwater, they are only dark shapes and muted disturbances, but they belong to the same system. The tower's formation, the lake's chemistry, and the food web are linked through the closed basin's unusual conditions. Mono Lake holds them all in one quiet bowl. This unity is easy to miss when looking at a single tower. A photograph may isolate it against water or sky, but in the basin, nothing is isolated. The tower is tied to spring water below, lake chemistry around it, light above it, algae in the water, shrimp in the currents, birds in the air, and mountains feeding the whole system. You can feel the connections widening outward with each breath. As we rise toward the old surface, the tufa's crown nears brighter water, and we begin to imagine the moment when falling lake levels first revealed it to air. The first exposure of a tufa tower must have been quiet, the lake level lowered by inches and seasons, not by spectacle in this gentle telling, and the top of the tower came near the moving surface. Waves washed across it. Sunlight touched it more directly. Then, one day or one season, a pale crown stood above the water, wet and shining, while the rest remained submerged. The lake had revealed a secret it had been keeping. That first exposed surface would have begun to change. Air dried it between waves. Minerals crystallized in tiny spaces. Sun warmed it. Birds may have rested on it.
The tower was still partly underwater, still connected to the chemistry that formed it, but its upper portion had entered a new set of conditions. It became both lake structure and shoreline object at once. As the lake lowered further, more of the tower emerged. The waterline moved down its sides, leaving stains, textures, and zones of differing weathering. Reflections shortened and lengthened depending on the hour. What had been a vertical underwater form became a pale figure in open air.
You can imagine standing on shore and seeing it slowly gain height without growing, simply because the water around it was leaving. This is an important kind of revelation. The tower did not become tall by rising in that moment. It became visible. Much of landscape understanding works this way. Forms exist below perception until conditions change enough for us to notice them. Mono Basin's Tufa towers remind you that hidden work may be complete long before it appears above the surface. Once fully exposed, the tower began its air chapter. Rain, frost, sun, salt, and wind touched it directly. Its growth by underwater precipitation slowed or ceased where lake water no longer surrounded it. Yet its story did not end. The exposed tower became habitat, landmark, shadow maker, and witness to changing lake levels. It continued in relationship with the basin, only in a different manner. You can stand beside an exposed tower and see several waterlines in the mind. The highest old lake might cover it entirely. A lower lake might reach halfway up. A present lake might lie beyond its base. Each imagined level changes the tower's meaning, showing it as submerged feature, islanded spire, shoreline stone, or dry landform. The same limestone body holds all these possible appearances. The Mono Basin itself holds them too. It is not fixed to one view. In wet memory, the lake spreads higher and wider. In dry memory, flats extend and towers stand farther from water. In present quiet, some towers touch the lake and others rest apart. The basin's identity includes all these states, like a long, slow chord with several notes sounding under the surface. As we return to the present shore, the exposed towers stand in moonlit air again, and the lake continues to breathe beside them. Moonlit Tufa has a softness unlike daylight. The rough surfaces lose some detail, and the towers become pale shapes with shadowed openings. Their bases may be surrounded by dark ground, shallow water, or reflection, depending on where you stand. The lake carries a faint shine, and the air is cool enough to make the mineral scent seem cleaner. You can feel the whole Mono Basin becoming hushed. Under the moon, the tower's resemblance to ruins may appear stronger, yet they are not ruins of human making. They are not remnants of walls or towers built for shelter. They are chemical formations, grown underwater, exposed by changing lake levels, and weathered by desert air. Knowing this gives them a deeper calm. They do not carry stories of conflict or collapse, only the long continuity of water and mineral. Their forms can seem almost companionable at night. One stands alone, narrow and leaning slightly in appearance. Another gathers several columns together. Another spreads low and broad, more mound than spire. Each has its own posture, though none has intention. You can move among them slowly in imagination, letting the shapes appear and recede at the edge of sight, never asking more from them than presence. The ground between towers may hold fine dust, salt crust, small stones, and the traces of old waves. It can feel fragile, so in the mind we step lightly. The shore is not empty ground, but part of the lake's archive. Every texture belongs to water, wind, chemistry, or life. Your pace slows naturally because the place rewards care, and care is restful. At a distance, the Sierra Nevada becomes a dark wall against the sky. Those mountains feed the lake through snow and streams. Yet at night they seem still and silent. Their connection to the towers is invisible now, but no less real. Snowmelt from their slopes may become groundwater may become spring water, and spring water may become tufa when it meets Mono Lake's alkaline body. This connection across distance is one of the basin's quiet wonders. A winter storm in the mountains can eventually influence a mineral process at the lake bed. A dry summer can draw water upward into the sky and leave salts behind. A hidden spring can reveal the chemistry of an entire watershed by building a pale tower. Nothing needs to announce the connection loudly. It is simply there. You can feel the connectedness as a kind of calm. The mind does not have to hold separate pieces. Mountain, lake, spring, tower, bird, sediment and sky all belong to one slow system. Thinking of them together makes the world feel less fragmented. It becomes easier to rest because the Mono Basin has already gathered the parts into a single open stillness. The moon rises higher, and shadows shorten or shift around the towers. Reflections tremble where water lies nearby. A faint breeze moves over the lake, touching the surface without disturbing the deep sense of quiet. The Tufa stands through it all. It has known brighter days, colder nights, higher water, lower water, and the dense green silence of submersion. As we continue along the moonlit shore, the mineral forms begin to show the basin's older volcanic backdrop, dark and cooled beyond the lake. The volcanic landscape around Mono Basin gives the Tufa towers a quiet contrast. Darker islands, domes, and distant craters remind us that the region has also been shaped by heat from below. Yet tonight, those volcanic forms are cool under moonlight, softened by distance and night air. The pale tufa, made by water chemistry, stands against this older darkness with a gentle brightness. Fire and water are not in conflict here. They are chapters in the same landscape. Volcanic activity helped build and texture the basin's surroundings, while water gathered in the closed hollow and began its long chemical work. Ash and volcanic sediment could settle into the lake. Rock weathering could contribute dissolved materials. The Tufa towers are not volcanic themselves, but they belong to a basin where volcanic history is part of the ground. You can imagine ash once falling lightly over water, drifting down through the lake, and becoming a thin layer in the sediment. Later, spring water rose through layers like that. Minerals gathered around vents. The lake concentrated salts through evaporation. Processes from very different energies eventually rested together in one quiet floor. Mono Basin teaches that even forceful origins can settle into peace over time. The dark volcanic forms also shape the way light moves across the basin. At sunset, they hold shadow early. In moonlight, they become broad silhouettes. Against them, Tufa appears almost luminous, not because it shines by itself, but because pale limestone catches whatever light is available. The contrast is calm and spacious, like a low note and a high note held together without strain. The islands in Mono Lake add another sense of depth. They rise from the water as reminders that the lake floor is not flat in a simple way. Beneath the surface are contours, sediments, vents, and hidden features. The Tufa towers along the shore are only part of a larger underwater terrain. You can picture that terrain continuing into darkness, shaped by layers we only partly see. This hidden terrain invites a slower imagination. We do not need to map every feature. It is enough to sense that the lake has depth, texture, and history beneath its reflective surface. The visible towers offer entry points into that unseen world. They are like pale sentences from a larger page, giving us enough to understand the tone without requiring us to read everything at once. As night air settles, the volcanic hills and Tufa towers share the same silence. One was formed by heat, the other by cool mineral water, yet both now rest under the same sky. Time has lowered their energy into stillness. You can feel your own body following that lowering, shoulders softening, breath lengthening, thoughts becoming less distinct and more spacious. The basin does not flatten into simplicity as it grows quieter. It becomes richer in a softer way. Geology, chemistry, life, and weather remain present, but they no longer ask to be separated into sharp categories. They blend in the listener's mind, like reflections on slightly moving water. The Mono Basin becomes one continuous calm. And as the volcanic darkness rests behind us, we turn back toward the pale towers and the clear science of their limestone bodies. Tufa is a form of calcium carbonate, related to limestone, but created in a particular setting where mineral-rich waters interact. In Mono Lake, the most familiar towers formed when calcium-bearing freshwater springs entered carbonate-rich alkaline lake water. The reaction produced solid carbonate minerals that accumulated around vents and surfaces. You can think of it as water leaving a stone trace of its own meeting. The word calcium carbonate may sound technical, but the material is common across many landscapes. It appears in limestone, shells, cave formations, and mineral deposits. What makes Mono Basin special is the way this mineral gathered into towers beneath an inland saline lake. The shape tells the story of underwater springs. The chemistry tells the story of a closed basin. Together, they make the Tufa feel both familiar and otherworldly. The towers can include different textures and mineral forms depending on local conditions. Some may form branching, porous, or clotted structures. The presence of microbes, organic matter, flow patterns, and changing chemistry can influence what develops. You do not need to hold every variation in detail. It is enough to know that Tufa grows in response to its immediate environment. That environment was always changing slightly. Lake levels shifted, temperature varied with season and depth, spring flow strengthened or weakened, biological activity changed with light and nutrients. Sediment moved. The tower recorded these subtle changes through variations in texture and shape. Its surface is not random. It is a quiet archive of conditions surrounding the vent while the tower grew. When exposed to air, calcium carbonate can weather in visible ways. Rainwater, though often limited in this dry basin, can dissolve small amounts or carry minerals across surfaces. Freeze and thaw can affect fragile textures. Wind can abrade exposed edges over long spans. Salt crystallization may contribute to surface change near saline water. These processes are slow, but they keep the Tufa in conversation with the present. This ongoing weathering means the towers are not frozen outside time. They are stable enough to feel ancient, yet responsive enough to remain part of the landscape's current life. A shadowed pore may shelter moisture for a little longer. A ledge may catch dust. A crack may widen slightly across years. The Mono Basin keeps touching what it has revealed. The color of the Tufa comes partly from the carbonate itself and partly from surface conditions. Pale cream, white, gray, tan, and faint warmer tones can appear depending on light, moisture, weathering, and mineral staining. At sunset, even the plainest surface can glow with temporary warmth. At night, those colors withdraw, and the tower becomes a shape of quiet brightness. You can let the technical terms dissolve again into sensation. Limestone rough under imagined fingers. Cool air moving through openings. Salt scent at the shore. Green water in the memory of submersion. Pale columns under stars. The science remains, but it is carried by the senses now, and the senses are what help the body drift towards sleep. As we settle into that sensory quiet, the towers begin to feel like slow clocks, measuring not hours, but the long rhythm of water entering and leaving the basin. A clock of Tufa does not tick, it gathers. Each layer marks conditions that allowed mineral to settle. Each hollow marks water, gas, life, or absence. Each exposed surface marks a later change in lake level. The whole tower measures time through form, not through numbers. You can stand beside it and feel time as texture, as roughness, as pale stone under a darkening sky. The Mono Basin has many clocks like this. Shoreline terraces mark former lake levels. Sediment layers mark changes in climate and deposition. Volcanic features mark older episodes of heat. Salt crusts mark recent evaporation. Bird migrations mark seasonal abundance. The Tufa towers belong among these clocks, but they are especially visible because they rise from the shore like time made vertical. You do not need to count the years to feel their slowness. The body understands through atmosphere. The wide basin, the dry air, the still water, and the pale towers all suggest duration. They make the present moment feel thin and tender compared with the long processes behind it. That feeling is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to soften the edges of ordinary urgency. Time at Mono Lake is layered rather than linear in the mind. You see the present tower in moonlight. You imagine it underwater in green light. You sense snow falling in mountains. You feel evaporation under summer sun. You picture birds arriving in season. These times coexist gently, and the basin holds them all without confusion. The place becomes a resting place for memory. This layered time is one reason the Tufa towers are so soothing to contemplate. They offer enough complexity to occupy the mind, but not enough sharpness to disturb it. Every question leads to a slower answer. How did they form? By water meeting water. Why here? Because the basin holds minerals. Why this shape? Because springs, flow, and time guided it. Each answer lowers the voice. You can imagine returning to the same tower across many evenings. The surface would seem unchanged at first, but water level might differ slightly. Shadows would fall in another direction. Birds might rest on a different ledge. A salt line might appear or vanish near the base. The tower teaches attention to small changes, and small changes are easier to hold than worries. The lake also changes from year to year. Wet winters, dry years, management decisions, and climate patterns all influence its level. As the water rises or falls, the relationship between towers and shoreline changes. Some bases become wet again, some reflections lengthen, some mudflats narrow or widen. The Tufa towers remain markers within this shifting edge, reminding us that landscapes are never entirely still, even when they appear peaceful. Stillness here is not the absence of movement. It is movement slowed enough for the mind to rest. Water moves through the basin. Minerals move in solution. Birds move through seasons. Wind moves over the lake. But the combined effect is calm, because every motion belongs to a larger patience. You can feel that patience drawing you further inward. And as that inward quiet deepens, we begin to walk in imagination among the towers themselves, noticing their individual shapes without hurrying past. One tower stands narrow and ridged, its sides rising in uneven flutes that catch low light. You can see small pockets in the limestone, each one holding shadow. Its base spreads slightly where mineral gathered near the old vent. Then the form tapers upward, as if the spring once focused its flow through a tighter passage. In the moonlit Mono Basin, it seems almost weightless, though it is made of stone. Another tower is broader, more like a clustered mound of columns grown together. Openings pass through it, framing dark pieces of lake and sky. Its surface is knobby, porous, and irregular, suggesting many small shifts in flow during formation. You can imagine water once moving through those openings, carrying dissolved calcium outward, while carbonate gathered along the edges. Now wind moves there instead, softly and without sound. A lower tufa form rests closer to the ground, with rounded lobes and shallow hollows. It may not draw the eye as quickly as a tall spire, but it holds the same process in a quieter shape. Perhaps the spring was weaker, the lake level changed sooner, or growth spread outward rather than upward. Its modest form is restful, because it reminds you that significance does not always need height. Some towers stand near enough to one another that they create a small mineral grove. You can imagine walking slowly between them, the ground pale beneath you, the lake breathing nearby. Shadows overlap. Openings appear and disappear as your angle changes. Each tower seems separate, then connected, then separate again. The experience is less like passing objects, and more like moving through a texture of time. The surfaces reward patience. A ridge that seemed plain from far away becomes layered with smaller ridges. A shadowed hollow reveals a pale inner wall. A rough shelf holds grains of dust and dried mineral. Tiny cracks follow curves made long ago by water. You can keep looking without reaching an end, because natural forms do not reveal themselves all at once. This close attention is quiet enough for sleep. It gives the mind something gentle to do. Trace a ridge. Notice a hollow. Follow a reflection. Imagine water rising. Return to breath. The Tufa towers of Mono Basin become a landscape for the half-dreaming mind, detailed but unthreatening, ancient but near, scientific but soft with wonder. If your thoughts drift away, the basin welcomes them back without complaint. The lake remains beside you. The mountains remain around you. The towers remain where mineral water made them. There is no need to remember every term. The feeling is enough. Closed basin, alkaline lake, spring water, pale stone, slow formation, cool night, and the endless patience of water. As we move beyond the grove of towers, The shoreline opens again, and the lake's wide surface carries us back into spaciousness. The open water of Mono Lake spreads like a dark sheet under the night sky. Its surface may be calm enough to hold stars, or lightly stirred by wind into fine shifting scales. The towers near the shore stand at the edge of that darkness, pale and irregular, as if they are listening to the lake that made them. You can feel the water's breadth as a soft expansion in the chest. Across the lake, distant forms lose their detail. Islands become low shadows. The far shore becomes a line between darker water and darker land. The sky lifts higher as the ground grows less distinct. In this wide view, the Tufa towers become smaller, but not less meaningful. They are local expressions of the whole basin, little visible thresholds in a vast quiet system. The lake's surface is the place where water leaves through evaporation. Molecules lift invisibly into air, especially when dryness, warmth, and wind allow. The departing water carries almost no memory to the eye, yet it changes everything by what it leaves behind. Salts remain, carbonate remains. The lake becomes more concentrated. The conditions for tufa formation are maintained through countless invisible departures. This is a beautiful reversal. Loss creates concentration. Departure allows mineral richness. Evaporation, which might seem like disappearance, helps prepare the lake for stone. In the Mono Basin, absence and presence are braided together. Water leaves, minerals stay. Springs rise and tufa forms. You can let this thought pass slowly, like a ripple crossing dark water. The same surface receives incoming streams and precipitation. Rain may fall directly on the lake. Snowmelt may arrive through creeks. Groundwater may enter from below. Each arrival freshens the story slightly, even as evaporation continues. The lake is always balancing incoming and outgoing water, and the Tufa towers stand as reminders that balance is not static. It is an ongoing breath. On the shore, you breathe with it. The cool air enters. The warmer breath leaves. A pause. Another breath. The rhythm is simple, but it belongs to larger rhythms: lake level, season, weather, formation, exposure. Sleep often comes when the body finds a rhythm it trusts, and the Mono Basin offers many rhythms slow enough to trust. The Tufa towers do not move with that breath, but they were made by it in a broader sense. They required water's arrival, mineral retention, and the long exhale of evaporation. They required groundwater rising from the hidden interior of the land. They required the lake to be both receiving and losing, open to the sky and closed to outward drainage. Their stillness is full of motion remembered. As we continue along the dark shore, the lake's surface seems to lower in sound, and the story turns once more toward the ground beneath the water. Beneath Mono Lake, the basin floor is not a simple flat bottom. It holds sediments, slopes, submerged features, spring vents, and records of changing water levels. Some areas may be soft with fine mud. Others may contain coarser material from streams or older shorelines. The Tufa towers rise where particular groundwater pathways and lake chemistry met. Each one is connected to hidden structure under the sediment. You can imagine descending through the water again, not quickly, but as a thought sinking after a long day. The surface light fades. The tower grows taller beside you. The base approaches. Fine sediment lifts slightly in the movement of water, then settles again. Near the floor, the world feels cooler and darker, with the quiet weight of material that has been gathering for ages. At the lakebed, small chemical differences become important. A slight change in pH, carbonate concentration, calcium supply, temperature, or flow can influence where minerals form. These differences may be tiny to the senses, but over time they create visible forms. The Tufa Tower is therefore a magnified memory of subtle gradients. It shows how small differences, patiently repeated, become landscape. Sediment can preserve other records too. Changes in algae, mineral composition, ash layers, or grain size may tell scientists about past climates and lake conditions. But tonight we do not need to enter the archive with instruments. We only need to sense that the lake floor is layered with time. The tower rises from that layered quiet, and its pale body gives the hidden past a form we can see. The base also reminds us that growth was anchored to place. A spring vent existed there, not somewhere else. Groundwater found that path. Lake water surrounded it. The tower did not wander through the basin. It belonged to a precise meeting point, a local intimacy between below and above. You can feel the tenderness of that specificity, one place where the earth opened and made stone. This specificity is repeated across the basin in different ways. Each tufa cluster marks its own spring history. Each shoreline terrace marks its own water level. Each sediment layer marks its own conditions. The Mono Basin is wide, but its history is made of exact local moments, each one quiet enough to be missed unless time turns it into a visible sign. As sleep comes closer, exactness and softness can coexist. The science stays accurate, but the edges blur into calm. Calcium and carbonate still meet. Evaporation still concentrates. Groundwater still rises. Yet the words feel like stones under clear water, visible but softened by depth. You do not have to reach for them. They rest there, and you can drift above them. And as we drift above the lake bed, the tower beside us rises once more toward the old light, carrying the memory of every hidden layer below. The old light above the tower is gentle, filtered through mineral water and moved by every ripple at the surface. It does not arrive as a single beam, but as a wandering brightness, breaking apart over ridges, hollows, and small openings in the tufa. You can imagine the tower receiving that light through long underwater days, while its base remained dim and its upper edges shimmered softly. The Mono Basin, seen from below, becomes a place of suspended time. Every particle in the water seems to descend with purpose, though its purpose is only gravity. Tiny grains from stream sediment, carbonate crystals, organic fragments, and wind-blown dust settle through the lake at their own slow speeds. Some land on the tufa, some drift past into darker water, some become part of the lake bed. You can watch them fall and feel how even falling can be calm when it is this slow. The tower rises through that settling world. Its sides collect traces, but its main growth comes from the mineral reaction at and near the spring. Freshwater continues to bring calcium upward. The alkaline lake surrounds it with carbonate. The boundary between them shifts, breathes, and leaves behind stone. Over time, this vertical form becomes a quiet marker of movement through layers of water, sediment, and chemistry. If we follow the tower upward, the water grows brighter and the surface above becomes more defined. There may be a pale circle of sky distorted by ripples, or the dark underside of a floating bird passing slowly overhead. The tufa does not reach for these things. It simply rises because mineral has gathered where water allowed it. Its upward shape is not ambition, it is accumulation. That distinction is restful. The tower did not strive, it became. The basin did not hurry to decorate itself. It concentrated, received, evaporated, and held. The resulting forms are beautiful because they carry no urgency. You can let that way of being touch your own thoughts, allowing them to become less pointed, less demanding, more like particles settling through quiet water. Around the tower, the lake's salinity would be felt by every living thing adapted to it. Brine shrimp move easily where many freshwater organisms cannot. Alkali flies manage the strange edge between air and mineral water. Algae bloom and fade according to light, nutrients, and season. The tufa forms within this unusual living context, not separate from it. Mono Lake's ecology is spare in variety, yet abundant in rhythm. The rhythm of life here is seasonal. Warmth and light encourage algae. Shrimp populations rise and fall. Birds arrive when food is plentiful. The shore may seem animated for a time, then quieter again. These cycles pass around the towers like soft weather. The stone remains, but the life around it comes in pulses, each one tuned to the lake's chemistry and the years unfolding. You can imagine a season of abundance above the submerged tufa. The water is full of tiny drifting life, and shadows of birds move across the surface. Light enters in green sheets. The tower continues forming below, indifferent in the peaceful sense, not uncaring, but simply governed by water and minerals. Life passes, feeds, rests, and moves on, while the tower gathers layer after layer. This coexistence of brief life and long stone is one of the basin's most soothing contrasts. A shrimp may live a short life in the lake's bright months. A bird may pause only briefly on a migration route. A tower may stand through centuries of changing levels. None cancels the other. The Mono Basin gives each scale its place, from the flicker of a tiny body to the patient growth of limestone. As we rise once more toward the old surface, the water thins in light, and the idea of exposure returns like dawn touching the crown of stone. The moment a tower's top meets air is only one instant in a long continuum. Before it, waves moved above the stone. After it, waves washed around the exposed crown. The difference is subtle at first, almost tender. A wet, pale surface breaks the lake's skin and catches sunlight without the soft filter of water. You can imagine the first exposed tufa shining like a whisper made visible. With each lowering of the lake, more of the tower enters air. The waterline traces its shape, lingering in hollows and leaving darker damp bands before they dry. Minerals may crystallize along edges where water evaporates. Birds may find the new perch. Wind may begin to pass through openings that once held lake water. The tower does not change identity, but it gains a new atmosphere. This new atmosphere carries scents the underwater tower never knew directly. Dry sagebrush, warm dust, alkali flats, cold evening air, and the faint mineral breath of the lake all move around the exposed limestone. You can stand beside the tower and feel how air gives the surface a sharper texture, while memory keeps it connected to water. The form is now between elements. Between is a key word for Mono Basin. It lies between mountain and desert, between wet and dry, between freshwater inflow and saline concentration, between volcanic darkness and pale carbonate. The Tufa towers embody that betweenness. They formed where fresh groundwater met alkaline lake water. They stand where old lake bed meets present shore. They invite you to rest in thresholds rather than hurry across them. A threshold can be peaceful when nothing demands passage. Here, the shore does not push you onward. It allows you to linger. You can look at the line where water touches land and sense how that line has moved through time. Higher, lower, nearer, farther. The Tufa towers have known many positions relative to that line, and each position has left a subtle trace. The old water lines may appear as stains, textures, or erosional marks on some surfaces, and as terraces or strand lines around the basin. They tell of former balances between inflow and evaporation. When the lake stood at those levels, waves worked the shore, sediments settled in different places, and tufa formed where springs remained submerged. You can imagine those vanished shorelines wrapping around the basin like quiet rings. Each ring belongs to a different lake body, though all are mono lake. The lake has been larger and smaller, fresher and saltier, higher and lower. It has responded to climate, weather, stream flow, evaporation, and more recent water management. The towers show this variability in a way that feels calm rather than chaotic. Change here is patterned by the slow logic of a closed basin. As we walk along the present shore, the exposed towers become guides to former water, and former water becomes a guide to the hidden springs below. A guide does not need to speak loudly. The Tufa Tower guides by standing. It shows where mineral precipitation once occurred. It suggests a spring, a lake level, a chemistry, and a period of submersion. You can look at its pale body and be led backward into water without leaving the shore. The tower is a quiet invitation to imagine what the basin used to hold. When you stand very still, the present and past almost overlap. The lake lies in front of you, dark and mineral. The dry ground lies under you, pale and textured. The tower rises beside you, shaped by a former lake. In your mind, the water returns, lifting around your ankles, then your waist, then above your head. The exposed landscape becomes submerged memory again. This overlap does not erase the present, it enriches it. The dry air remains cool against your face. The scent of sagebrush remains. The sound of a small wave remains. But beneath those sensations, you sense the older coolness of water, the muffled light, the slow spring rising from below. Mono Basin becomes double.
and the mind can drift between its two quiet states. That drifting is gentle enough for sleep because it follows real processes. We are not inventing a fantasy separate from the place. We are imagining the conditions that formed what we see. Higher lake levels, submerged springs, mineral-rich water, and carbonate precipitation. The dreaminess comes from geology itself. The facts are already soft when held at the pace of water. The tower's surface can help carry you between states. A dry hollow becomes an underwater pocket. A wind-cut opening becomes a channel for lake water. A sunlit ridge becomes a place where mineral once accumulated in dimness. You can let every detail translate slowly, air into water, shadow into depth, stillness into formation. The same stone supports both views. This translation is part of why the Mono Basin feels so atmospheric. It does not offer a single simple image. It offers a layered experience, where every visible form suggests invisible histories. The Tufa towers are the clearest examples, but the same layering appears in beaches, sediments, volcanic forms, and shore vegetation. The whole basin feels like a memory you can walk through. As the moonlight shifts, you may notice that the towers cast shadows differently than ordinary rocks. Their openings break shadow into fragments. Their rough surfaces soften edges. Their pale carbonate reflects even faint light. The shadows become porous, like the stone itself. It is a small detail, but in a quiet place, small details become places to rest. The lake nearby keeps its own darkness. If the water is calm, it holds stars and tower reflections. If it is rippled, it breaks them into little moving lines. The reflection of Tufa is never as solid as the tower, but it reminds you how the tower began. Stone and water face one another, one fixed, one changing, both part of the same stillness. And as we follow the reflection outward, the surface of Mono Lake opens into the story of evaporation, the quiet lifting that concentrates the basin. Evaporation is almost invisible while it is happening. You do not see water leaving the lake molecule by molecule, though you can feel the dry air and sun that encourage it. Over time, however, its effects are everywhere. Salts become concentrated. Alkalinity becomes part of the lake's identity. Shorelines move when evaporation exceeds inflow. Tufa formation depends on the chemical richness this lifting helps create. The sky is part of the stone. This may be the most delicate idea in the basin. Something leaving helps something else remain. Water rises into air, while dissolved minerals stay behind in the lake. The remaining water becomes more concentrated, more alkaline, more ready to react with calcium-rich springs. A tower grows because the basin has held what evaporation did not take. Absence becomes preparation. On warm days, evaporation can seem connected to brightness. Sunlight lies over the lake. Heat touches the surface. Wind carries dry air across the water and makes room for more vapor to rise. By evening, the process feels less visible, but it has not vanished entirely. The cooling air settles, and the lake keeps the memory of the day in its chemistry, its level, and its surface. You can imagine years of this. A lake receives spring runoff, then loses water to dry air. It receives again, loses again, shifts again. Through all of it, carbonate and other dissolved minerals remain in the closed basin. The Tufa Tower forms where this long concentration meets the fresh signal of groundwater. It is not the product of one season, but of repeated balances across time. The basin's closed nature makes this possible. If Mono Lake had a regular outlet, many dissolved materials would flow away. The water might be less saline, less alkaline, and less suited to these particular Tufa towers. Instead, the lake is terminal, holding its chemistry within the basin. The mountains send water inward, and the sky takes water upward. The lake remains between them, gathering. This gathering is not static. It is dynamic, responsive, always adjusting. A wet period can dilute the lake somewhat and raise its level. A dry period can concentrate it further and lower its shoreline. These changes affect habitats, tufa exposure, and the relationship between water and stone. Yet the overall closed basin pattern persists, giving Mono Lake its distinctive character and its calming sense of inward continuity. You can feel inward continuity in your own body as you listen. Breath comes in,
breath leaves, and something quiet remains. Attention wanders, returns, and settles a little deeper. The Mono Basin becomes a mirror for that process, not because it is human, but because slow natural rhythms often help human rhythms soften. The Tufa towers stand at the edge of that breathing. As evaporation lifts water into the dark air, the minerals remain below, and the lake's unseen chemistry gathers itself around the spring vents again. At the vents, the lake's chemistry becomes visible, not all at once, not in a flash, but through the slow appearance of carbonate minerals. The spring water enters with calcium. The lake holds carbonate.
When they mix, the water can no longer keep all of that material dissolved, and solid calcium carbonate begins to form. A pale crust appears where there had been only fluid contact. This transformation from dissolved to solid is central to Tufa. The ingredients are invisible in solution, carried quietly by water. Then conditions change, and the same ingredients become stone. You can imagine this as a soft crystallizing of a meeting, a way for water to leave behind, proof that it touched another water. The tower is evidence of intimacy between two chemistries. The mineral may form around grains of sediment, plant fragments, microbial surfaces, or existing tufa. Once a surface exists, more mineral can attach. The growing structure changes flow, and changed flow affects further growth.
In time, the tower becomes complex, with layers, pores, and internal passageways. The shape is not planned, but it is shaped by feedback, by each new surface influencing the next. In some places, tufa can develop around gas bubbles or biological textures, creating delicate forms. In others, steady spring flow can build heavier chimneys. The Mono Basin contains a range of textures because local conditions varied. That variety gives the towers their quiet individuality. You can move from one formation to another and feel that each one has listened to a slightly different spring. The lake water around the vent may also shift with seasons. Temperature affects chemical reactions. Biological activity affects carbonate chemistry. Lake level changes pressure, depth, and light. Inflow can dilute or alter the water. The tower's growth reflects not just a constant recipe, but a living chemical environment changing gently through time. Its surface is a record of variation.
Variation does not break the calm, it deepens it. A perfectly uniform tower might be less restful than these irregular forms, because the eye finds gentle pathways through their ridges and hollows. You can trace the unevenness and feel process rather than design. The tower's roughness is like a quiet voice, never sharp, always saying that time moved through here in water. As we imagine this growth continuing below the old surface, the tower becomes taller, and the lake around it keeps changing. With climate and season, climate enters the Tufa story through water balance. Snowpack, rainfall, temperature, wind, and evaporation all influence how much water enters or leaves the basin.
A series of wet years can lift the lake, submerging more shoreline and changing the chemistry through dilution. Dry periods can lower the lake and expose tufa to air. The towers are shaped by climate not as weather alone, but as duration. In a wetter interval, springs might remain underwater for longer, allowing tufa growth to continue around their vents. A higher lake could cover existing towers, returning exposed surfaces to submerged conditions. Waves might work higher shorelines, and sediments might settle in places now dry. The whole basin would feel fuller, the water reaching farther into coves and flats, softening edges that are now open to wind. In a drier interval, the lake retreats inward. Tufa towers emerge, mudflats widen, and salts may become more concentrated. Springs that once entered lake water might emerge onto shore or shallow flats, changing the conditions for carbonate formation. Some growth may stop in exposed areas while continuing elsewhere underwater. The shoreline becomes a moving boundary between formation, exposure, and weathering.
This movement does not need to be imagined as abrupt. It can be slow enough that one generation notices a different shore from the last, or one season leaves a slightly altered edge. The calm comes from scale. Lake level is always responding, but the response is spread across time, water, and basin shape. You can let the changing shoreline move at the pace of a long exhale. The
The Tufa towers reveal these responses more clearly because they are fixed markers against moving water. When the lake rises, it touches them differently. When it falls, more of them appears. Their relationship to the waterline tells part of the basin's recent story. Standing beside them, you can see that still objects can make movement visible, simply by remaining there. The surrounding terraces and old shore marks do similar work at larger scales. They hold the memory of former lake surfaces, etched or deposited along slopes and basin margins. From a distance, they may be subtle, but once noticed, they change the entire landscape. You realize the lake has occupied many levels, and the present surface is only one resting place in a long sequence. Mono Basin becomes more spacious when you understand this. The empty air above dry flats may once have been water. A tower standing in dust may once have been deeply submerged. A far terrace may once have been a shoreline where small waves moved. The present is not diminished by these former states. It becomes deeper, layered with quiet possibility. As we let those former lake levels rise and fall in the mind, the Tufa towers remain our steady companions, pale markers within the basin's slow breathing. A steady companion in a sleep story should never pull you upward too sharply. The Tufa towers do not. They invite a downward attention toward origins, roots, hidden springs, and submerged surfaces. Even when they rise visibly into air, their story leads below. You look at the tower and feel the old water around it. You hear the present wave and sense the ancient lake beneath. This downward attention is different from fear. It is a calm descent into explanation and sensation. We follow the tower to the spring to the groundwater to snowmelt and stone. We follow the lake to evaporation, the evaporation to mineral concentration, the concentration back to tufa. Each path returns gently to the same place, like a wave returning to shore. Repetition is part of the comfort. The same ingredients come back in slightly different light. Water, mineral, basin, time. They do not become boring because each return reveals another layer. This is how natural landscapes often teach us, not by novelty every moment, but by slow re-encounter. Mono Lake's Tufa towers become familiar, and familiarity makes them softer. You can imagine sitting beside one for a whole night. At first you notice its outline. Later, its texture. Later still, the way it changes with moon position, breeze, reflection, and your own tired eyes. By the deepest part of night, the tower is no longer something to study. It is simply part of the calm around you, steady as breath. The lake's small waves continue. They slide against shore, pause, and withdraw. If they reach tufa, they touch the stone with a sound barely above silence. Each wave is brief, but the pattern is ancient. Water has touched stone in this basin in many forms: rain, lake, spring, vapor, snowmelt, and groundwater. The tower holds evidence of water's many quiet states. Sagebrush beyond the shore adds a dry, terrestrial note to the scene. Its scent is especially clear in cool air, slightly resinous, clean, and soft. This matters because the Mono Basin is not only water, it is also high desert, volcanic ground, mountain shadow, and open sky. The Tufa towers belong to the meeting of lake and land, and your senses can feel both at once. The ground cools as night continues. Heat stored from the day leaves the flats, stones, and carbonate surfaces. Air settles into low places. The lake may hold warmth a little longer than the land, creating subtle differences you can feel near the shore. These temperature shifts are small, but they add to the basin's layered atmosphere, the coolness of night over a mineral lake. As the body grows heavier, the mind may drift back underwater again, where temperature changes more slowly and the Tufa tower stands in dim green. Underwater, temperature is buffered by the lake. The upper layer may warm in sunlight, while deeper water remains cooler. Seasonal mixing can change conditions, but the sense near a submerged tower is generally one of softened fluctuation. You can feel the water close around you as a steady coolness, neither startling nor severe. It slows movement, sound, and thought, giving the tower its original quiet. Pressure increases with depth, but here it can be imagined as gentle enclosure rather than heaviness. The water holds you evenly. It presses not like a burden, but like a calm hand over the world, smoothing edges and lowering sound. The tufa grew inside that pressure, layer by layer, while light diminished and currents moved softly around its surface. The old lake was a slow room. In that room, fresh spring water entered from below with its own temperature and chemistry. It might have felt cooler against the surrounding lake water, a subtle thread rising through a denser medium. Such differences can create shimmering boundaries, small distortions in the water where one flow meets another. You can picture that shimmer wrapping the vent, marking the place where stone would begin to form. The tower's internal passages may have carried spring water upward as walls thickened around them. Some passages remained open for a time, others may have narrowed or sealed. New routes may have developed as flow changed. The tower, then, was not merely coated on the outside. It was a structure with inner histories, channels, and former pathways, all shaped by the persistence of water. When exposed, those inner histories may become visible as holes, tubes, and cavities. What was once a water path becomes an airspace. What once carried chemistry now carries shadow and wind. You can look through an opening in Tufa and imagine the spring that helped create it, moving there in cool darkness long before the shoreline took its present shape. This conversion of water path into air hollow is deeply calming to contemplate. It shows how one condition can become another without losing continuity. Water leaves, space remains, mineral forms, then shelters emptiness. The tower is solid and porous at once, full of matter and full of absence. Mono Basin's Tufa teaches that emptiness can be part of structure. As we drift through those imagined openings, the lake outside darkens again, and the basin's stars begin to appear in the wavering ceiling above. Stars seen through water would tremble with every movement at the surface. They would not be sharp points, but broken flecks of light, stretching and gathering as ripples pass. The Tufa Tower below would receive almost none of that starlight, yet the idea of it above adds a quiet depth to the scene. You can imagine being below the old lake surface, aware of night without needing to see it clearly. Above the present lake, the stars are sharper in dry air. The Mono Basin's openness gives them room. The Tufa towers stand beneath them with pale surfaces turned silver by faint light. This pairing, star and stone, sky and lake bed, makes the basin feel both high and deep at once. You are on land, yet your thoughts continue to descend into water. The Milky Way, when visible, can seem like another pale mineral band across the sky. It does not belong to the Tufa scientifically, of course, but in the senses it echoes the lake's light tones. Pale stone below, pale stars above, dark water between. The whole scene becomes balanced, with brightness distributed gently across height and depth. Nothing flares. Everything glows softly. This glow is very different from daylight brilliance. It asks less of the eyes. It lets the towers become shapes for rest, rather than objects for analysis. You know their science now, and that knowledge can remain in the background like a quiet current. The main sensation is the calm of being beside an ancient lake, with cool air moving lightly around limestone formed under silence. If a breeze crosses the water, the reflections loosen. Stars break into trembling fragments. The Tufa's reflected shapes lengthen and dissolve. The lake surface becomes a moving skin over deeper stillness. This is how the basin holds motion and calm together. The uppermost layer responds quickly, while the deeper story changes slowly. Your thoughts can settle below the ripples. The Tufa towers also hold this layered response. Their surfaces may be altered by weather, but their formation story remains older and slower. Their reflections may tremble, but their bodies stand. Their shadows may change, but their mineral origin does not. In a restless mind, this distinction can be soothing. Movement above, steadiness below, both allowed, neither needing to defeat the other. As the night continues, the shoreline becomes less detailed, and the Tufa towers become pale markers guiding us through the dark. The path between towers is imagined more than seen now.
You follow shapes, not colors. A pale column at the left, a low mound near the water, a cluster ahead, open in places like carved foam.
The ground feels cool and granular underfoot, with small textures of dried mud, salt, and stone. The lake remains beside you, its sound soft enough to seem part of your own breathing. In the dark, the mind naturally fills what the eyes cannot. A hollow becomes deeper, a ridge becomes smoother. The old underwater state feels nearer. This is not confusion, but a gentle blending of perception and memory. You know the tower formed below lake water, so darkness lets you feel that origin more strongly. The present shore becomes porous to the past. The Mono Basin is well suited to this half-waking state. Its forms are distinct enough to guide you, yet quiet enough not to startle. The Tufa towers hold attention without demanding quick interpretation. The lake offers a low repeated sound. The surrounding mountains hold the horizon in shadow. Everything supports a gradual inward drift, the kind of drift that carries you towards sleep. Even the chemistry can become part of that drift. Calcium, carbonate, water, stone. Each word is plain, but together they make a slow circle. Fresh water rises. Lake water receives. Mineral forms. Tower grows. Lake falls. Tower appears. Weather touches. Reflection trembles. The sequence is long enough to occupy the mind, and soft enough to let it loosen. You might return to one tower again and again in thought. Its surface is rough. Its base widens. Its openings hold darkness. Its crown catches faint light. Beneath it, a spring once rose. Around it, Mono Lake once covered everything in green mineral water. Now air moves through the same spaces. The tower remains, holding both conditions in balance. Balance does not mean sameness. It means the parts have found a way to exist together. The Mono Basin balances desert dryness with lake water, mineral concentration with living abundance, exposed stone with submerged origin, solitude with seasonal migration. These pairings make the place feel whole. You can rest inside that wholeness without needing to choose one side of it. As we pause beside the tower, the night air seems to settle lower, and the lake's mineral scent becomes faint but clear. The scent of Mono Lake is not heavy. It arrives as a mineral brightness, mixed with wet sediment near the shore and dry plants farther back. On warmer days it may be more noticeable, while in cool night air it becomes cleaner and thinner. You breathe it in gently, and it tells you where you are. Salt, alkali, mud, sage, and water become one quiet signature. Smell can hold landscape in a way sight cannot. A pale tower may be remembered in outline, but the scent of the shore brings back air temperature, damp ground, and distance. The Mono Basin's fragrance belongs to its chemistry, climate, and ecology all at once. It is not separate from Tufa formation, because the same mineral nature that scents the lake also prepares its water for carbonate stone.
Near the towers, wet and dry scents meet. If water laps at the base, there is a cool mineral note. If the tower stands farther inland, dust and sage may be stronger. After rain, carbonate surfaces darken, and the air can carry a softened smell of damp stone. Each condition changes the atmosphere slightly, while the underlying basin remains recognizable. Sound carries the same local signature. Waves here do not sound like ocean surf. They are smaller, lake-bound, often gentle against mud, stone, or tufa. Wind may sound dry in brush and smooth over water. Birds add distant calls that arrive and fade across open space. The result is a soundscape of spacing, where every note has room around it. Room around sound is important for rest. It gives the mind a place to settle between impressions. In the Mono Basin, the spaces between sounds are wide. A wave touches shore, then quiet returns. A bird calls, then distance opens again. A breeze passes, then thins. The Tufa towers stand through these intervals as if they are made partly of silence. You can let the intervals lengthen. The story does not need to hurry. The tower formed slowly, and we can notice it slowly. The lake concentrated minerals slowly, and we can understand that slowly. Groundwater moved through darkness slowly, and we can follow it slowly. The pace of the place gives permission for the pace of the voice, and the voice can become softer. As the voice softens, the basin's scientific details remain like distant shorelines, visible enough to guide us, quiet enough to let us drift.
The important details are simple when held gently. Mono Lake is a closed basin lake. Evaporation concentrates dissolved minerals. Its alkaline water contains abundant carbonate. Groundwater springs bring calcium from surrounding rocks and sediments. Where those waters meet beneath the lake, calcium carbonate precipitates and builds tufa. Over time, changing lake levels expose the towers to air. Each statement is clear, and each one lowers into the next like settling silt. Clarity can be soothing when it is unhurried. There is no need to decorate the process with danger or urgency. Chemistry is enough. Water is enough. Time is enough. The Tufa towers of Mono Basin are beautiful because ordinary earth processes have been given a particular basin, a particular lake, and enough duration to become visible. The result stands quietly under the open sky. You can feel how the explanation and the atmosphere support each other. The scent of salt makes evaporation real. The pale stone makes carbonate real. The dry basin makes the closed system real. The distant mountains make groundwater and snowmelt real. The lake's still surface makes time feel wide. Science becomes not a separate lecture, but a way of noticing the place more tenderly. Tender noticing is the right mode here. The towers are fragile in some ways, and the shoreline holds delicate ecological and geological textures. In imagination, we move lightly. We do not climb or break or disturb. We only observe, slowly, with enough distance to let the forms remain themselves. The calm of the Mono Basin is partly a calm of respect. Respect deepens sleep rather than preventing it. It quiets the urge to take, solve, or possess. It lets the landscape be. You can lie still and let the Tufa towers exist in your mind, pale and porous, without needing anything from them except the rhythm of their formation. Water met water. Stone gathered. The lake lowered. Night came. The basin held everything. As we move on, the shoreline curves gently, and new towers appear ahead, softened by distance and moonlight. From far away, a cluster of tufa may look like a single pale shape. As you approach in imagination, it separates into columns, mounds, shelves, and openings. The lake behind it is dark, and the sky above it is wide. Each step changes the spaces between forms. What looked solid becomes porous. What looked simple becomes layered. The cluster slowly reveals its structure. This is similar to the way the science reveals itself. At first, tufa formation may seem like one simple reaction. Look closer, and you see lake chemistry, spring pathways, microbial surfaces, flow changes, sedimentation, evaporation, climate, and exposure. Nothing contradicts the simple explanation. It only deepens it. The tower is still calcium carbonate, but calcium carbonate has become a landscape. The cluster's base may show where several springs emerged near each other, or where one flow system shifted through time. Some columns may have merged as they grew. Others may remain distinct, separated by narrow openings. Water once moved through and around them, and now air does. You can imagine the same space filled first with green lake water, then with cool night wind. The openings invite the eye. Through one, you see a strip of water. Through another, a darker shore. Through another, only shadow. These framed views make the tower feel like a participant in seeing, not just something seen. The Mono Basin looks different through tufa, because the stone adds its own history to whatever lies beyond. The view becomes mineralized. A bird may rest on a high point, still and quiet. Its shape is temporary compared with the tower, but its presence belongs. Birds have long used Mono Lake's food resources, following seasonal abundance in shrimp and flies. They bring movement, calls, and life to the mineral shore. The tower offers a perch, and the bird offers the scene a brief pulse before stillness returns. You can imagine that bird lifting away without haste, crossing the dark water toward another part of the lake. Its wings make only a faint sound in the mind. The tower remains. The lake remains. The basin receives the motion and smooths it into the night. This is how activity appears here, not as interruption, but as a small movement inside a larger,
calm. As we pass the cluster, the path opens to a wider flat where the old lake bed lies under cool air and remembers being underwater.
The flat ground near Mono Lake can look empty from a distance, but it is full of former water. Fine sediments, salt patterns, old shore textures, and subtle slopes all speak of lake margins shifting through time. You can imagine walking across this ground when it was submerged, your steps replaced by drifting particles and quiet currents. The present dryness is only one layer over a watery past. Under higher lake levels, this flat may have been covered by shallow water. Sunlight would reach the bottom easily, and small waves might stir fine sediment. Springs could emerge in places, building low tufa forms before larger towers developed elsewhere. Algae and tiny organisms would occupy the water column. The boundary between shore and lake would be somewhere behind us, higher on the land. As the lake fell, the flat emerged. Mud dried, salts formed delicate crusts. Wind began moving dust where water once moved. Plants adapted to the margins took hold where conditions allowed. The former lake bed became walking ground. But it did not lose its origin. You can feel the old water in its smoothness, its openness, and its pale mineral traces. This is a recurring feeling in the Mono Basin. The dry places remember water. The towers remember submersion. The terraces remember waves. The lake remembers streams and evaporation. Even the air, with its salt and alkali scent, seems to remember the surface it moved across. The whole place is memory expressed through texture, and texture is something the sleepy mind can hold gently. If you look back from the flat toward the Tufa towers, they seem to stand at the boundary between memory and presence. Their bases may be surrounded by exposed sediment, while the lake lies farther beyond. They show where water was, and by their chemistry, how that water behaved. They make the invisible visible and the past tangible, all without raising their voice. The open flat also gives a sense of scale. The towers may appear smaller against the basin's width, yet their meaning expands. They are not isolated curiosities, but signs of a whole hydrologic system. The mountains, groundwater, lake chemistry, climate, and evaporation all converge in them. One pale tower can hold the vastness of the basin in a small rough surface. As the flat cools under night, the ground releases the last warmth of the day, and the lake draws our attention back with a darker shimmer. The darker shimmer of Mono Lake at night is almost motionless until you watch closely. Then you see little changes, a thin line of movement, a tremble of reflected light, a small wave crossing another. The surface is never perfectly fixed, but its movements are slight enough to calm rather than distract. You can let your eyes rest there, where water gathers the dark and softens it. The Tufa towers reflected in that surface become elongated and uncertain. Their pale bodies stretch downward in wavering forms, as if returning to the underwater state where they began. A ripple breaks a reflection into pieces. Calm joins the pieces again. This repeated dissolving and rejoining feels like the mind near sleep, losing and recovering images without needing to hold them tightly. Reflections also remind us that the lake is still the central presence. Even exposed towers depend visually on water for part of their mood. A tower reflected in Mono Lake seems more complete, joined to a moving double that touches depth. Without reflection, it is still beautiful, but with reflection, its watery origin becomes visible again. The lake gives the tower back its dream. The color of night water depends on sky, moon, cloud, and wind. Sometimes it is black, sometimes it is silver, sometimes it holds a muted blue or gray that seems to come from within. Against this changing surface, the tufa remains pale, but never exactly the same. Each hour offers another version of stillness. This slow change is ideal for drifting. The mind can return to the same image repeatedly and find it slightly altered, never jolted, never abandoned. Tower and reflection, stone and water, shore and sky. The Mono Basin offers a few calm elements, arranged in endless soft variation. You can rest in that pattern as if resting beside a very slow tide, Though this is an inland lake, there are no ocean tides here shaping the shore in the familiar coastal way, but there are other rhythms. Wind setup, waves, seasonal inflow, evaporation, and long-term lake level changes all move the water's edge.
The shoreline breathes by different rules. The Tufa towers record these inland rhythms, grounded in basin hydrology rather than the pull of a sea. Understanding the difference keeps the place specific. Mono Lake is not a miniature ocean. It is its own mineral lake in a high desert basin, with its own chemistry, life, and geological history. The Tufa towers belong to this specificity. Their calm comes from being exactly where they are, formed by exactly these relationships, under this open basin sky. As the reflection fades in a passing ripple, we return once more to the tower's interior, where former water paths remain as quiet hollows. Inside a Tufa tower, the hollows and tubes suggest movement that is no longer visible. Some spaces may have formed around spring flow. Others may have developed as mineral grew unevenly around organic textures, gas or sediment. Now they hold air and shadow. You can look into them and sense not emptiness alone, but a record of what once passed through. The hollow is a memory of flow. This is a gentle way to think about absence. It is not simply lack. It can be evidence. A hole in Tufa may tell of water, gas, plant material, or changing growth. A dry channel may tell of a spring's former path. A gap between columns may tell of separate growth centers. The tower's empty spaces are part of its story, as meaningful as the solid carbonate around them. The same is true of the basin. A dry shoreline tells of absent water. A salt crust tells of evaporated water. A terrace tells of a lake surface no longer there. Absence becomes readable, calm, and almost tender. In the Mono Basin, what has gone often leaves a form behind, and the forms help us imagine without needing to force the past back into the present. You can let that idea settle into a sleepy mind. What leaves may still shape what remains. Water leaves minerals. Springs leave towers. Waves leave shorelines. Sediment leaves layers. Night leaves coolness after the day's heat. Each departure is soft here, part of a larger continuity. The Tufa towers stand as pale reminders that absence can have shape. The hollows also change how wind sounds around exposed towers. A breeze may pass through openings and around rough edges, though often too softly to hear distinctly. Still, you can imagine air finding the same space as water once occupied. The element changes, but the path remains. This continuity between water path and wind path gives the tower a peaceful sense of endurance. In low light, the interiors of openings become dark enough to seem deep. Your eye cannot follow every curve, and that hiddenness is restful. Not everything needs to be visible. The tower keeps some of its interior for itself, just as the basin keeps groundwater hidden below the surface. Quiet landscapes often have this quality. They reveal enough to invite trust and conceal enough to preserve wonder. As we leave those shadowed openings, the tower's outer surface returns to view, and every ridge seems to hold the slow touch of water. The ridges on Tufa are not carved in a single direction like grooves made by a tool. They are built, altered, and weathered by several processes over time. Mineral deposition adds texture, water movement shapes growth, exposure changes edges, dust and salts settle into protected spots. The result is a surface that feels accumulated rather than cut. You can see patience in the roughness. Some ridges may mark periods of stronger deposition, where carbonate gathered more quickly or along a favored flow path. Some knobs may reflect localized growth around small surfaces. Some smoother patches may have weathered differently. The tower's skin is a complicated record, but it does not need to be decoded completely to be appreciated. Its complexity is calm because it remains tactile and visual. Imagine your hand hovering near the stone. You sense coolness radiating from it after nightfall. You notice the uneven surface, the sharpness softened by age, the pores that would catch a fingertip. You do not need to touch to understand texture. The mind can feel it from sight, and that imagined texture anchors the drifting voice in the real material world. Materiality matters in a sleep narration. It keeps the dream from becoming too abstract. Tufa is mineral. The lake is saline. The air is dry. The sediment is fine. The sagebrush is resinous. The mountains are distant and dark. These sensory anchors let the listener float without losing the place. Mono Basin remains present, specific and grounded. The grounding is soft, not heavy. It is like knowing the bed beneath your body while imagining the lake beneath the sky. The Tufa towers offer that same duality, solid and dreamlike at once. They give the mind a physical form to rest on, while their underwater origin allows thought to drift downward through old water. Stone becomes a pillow for geological imagination. As night deepens further, the basin's colors withdraw almost completely, leaving texture, temperature, and rhythm to guide us. Without color, the coolness becomes more noticeable. The air brushes your skin. The ground holds a lingering chill. The lake feels darker and smoother, even when small ripples move across it. The Tufa towers become pale shapes with rough edges, their details softened but not erased. You can feel the world simplifying, not into emptiness, but into essence. Temperature changes slowly now. The day's warmth has thinned. The high desert night settles evenly over flats, water, and stone. Near the lake, moisture and mineral scent remain faint in the air. Farther from shore, sage and dust become clearer. These subtle shifts tell you where you are without needing sight. The Mono Basin can be known through the skin and breath. Rhythm continues at the waterline. Small waves arrive with a low, repeated sound. They touch shore and withdraw. Sometimes two waves meet and make a softer, irregular pattern. Sometimes calm spreads, and the sound nearly disappears. The Tufa towers stand near this rhythm, shaped by older water and companioned by present water. You can let the repetition slow your thoughts. Texture remains in the mind, even when the eyes rest. Rough tufa, fine sediment, smooth water, dry sage leaves, cold air, soft reflection. Each texture is simple, and together they make a place you can inhabit inwardly. You do not have to keep track of every process now. The science has become part of the atmosphere, like minerals dissolved invisibly in the lake. This is the point where explanation can become quieter without stopping. The tower formed by calcium carbonate precipitation. The phrase is still true, but in the half-dark, you feel it as pale mineral gathering around a spring. The lake is alkaline and saline. That remains true, but you feel it now as a clean mineral scent and a silky imagined touch of water. The mind likes this kind of translation before sleep. Facts become images. Images become sensations. Sensations become rhythm. Rhythm becomes rest. The Mono Basin offers a gentle path for that descent, because its geology is already slow, layered, and full of softly connected processes. Nothing needs to be invented to make it dreamlike. As we follow that path, the shoreline fades behind us again, and we drift into the old lake water, where the tower was still only partly grown. The young Tufa tower is shorter now in imagination, a pale mound around a spring vent on the lake floor. It has not yet risen into a column. Its surface is rough but low, with small openings where water escapes. Sediment lies around it, and the lake above is broad and green. You can see the beginning of height in it, a quiet promise made by chemistry. Spring water rises through the center or along one side, bringing calcium into contact with carbonate-rich lake water. A thin mineral coating forms where the two mix. More coating follows. The mound thickens. A small chimney begins. The structure is modest, yet the process is the same process that will one day make a tower visible from shore. Around this young formation, tiny organisms move through the water. Algae drift in the light above. Brine shrimp feed and swim. Fine particles fall. The lake floor receives everything. The spring continues. Nothing in the scene suggests urgency or display. It is simply a small place in the Mono Basin where water chemistry favors the appearance of stone. Over time, the chimney grows higher. Its sides roughen. It alters currents near the vent, and those altered currents help shape future deposition. Perhaps a secondary vent opens nearby.
Perhaps the main passage narrows and flow shifts outward. The tower's future complexity begins in these small changes. You can watch them slowly, as if time itself has become water. This early stage is comforting, because it shows that even the most striking forms begin gently. A tower begins as a crust, a mound, a slight mineral edge. The visible landmark has a quiet childhood beneath the lake. If you stand beside the exposed towers now, you are seeing the outcome of beginnings too subtle for a passing eye. The basin rewards what takes time. The lake level during this growth may have been higher than today. The tower had room to rise underwater, and the spring remained submerged. As long as the chemical conditions continued, the tower could keep gathering carbonate. Its height depended not only on time, but on sustained submersion, flow, and lake chemistry. The form is a measure of continuity. As continuity gathers, the young tower becomes taller, and the old lake begins to hold it like a pale column in a dim room. A taller submerged tower changes the space around it more strongly. It stands above the lake bed, interrupting currents and creating sheltered areas. Its upper parts reach into brighter water, while its lower parts remain close to sediment and spring flow. The tower becomes a vertical habitat, a mineral surface across several small environmental gradients. You can sense the water moving differently around its body. These gradients matter in quiet ways. Light varies with depth. Temperature may vary with season and water movement. Chemistry shifts near spring flow. Sediment is more abundant near the base. Small organisms respond to these differences. The tufa itself grows in relation to them. A tower is therefore not just height, but a stack of subtle conditions, rising through the lake. If you drift around it slowly, one side may feel more open to current, another more sheltered. One surface may receive more mineral deposition.
Another may collect fine particles. Openings may guide small flows through the structure. The tower's shape is a record of these differences, and its presence also creates new differences for the next stage of growth. This circularity is peaceful because it mirrors many natural processes. A form arises from conditions, then modifies the conditions around it. A shoreline shapes waves and is shaped by waves. A plant alters soil and is shaped by soil. A tufa tower grows from flow and then redirects flow. Nature often works through such conversation, not through one-way commands. The Mono Basin's broader landscape is also conversational in this sense. Mountains influence water. Water influences lake chemistry. Lake chemistry influences tufa. Tufa influences shoreline complexity and local habitat. Birds influence nutrient cycles in subtle ways. Sediments record the outcome. Every element responds, and the responses accumulate quietly. You can rest in that responsiveness. It means the landscape is not a set of separate objects, but a slow exchange. The towers are not isolated sculptures. They are participants in a basin-wide process. When you look at them, you are looking at relationship given mineral form, and relationship is often more soothing than isolation. As the submerged tower continues to rise, the lake above grows shallower around its crown, and the first touch of air waits somewhere in the future. Before air arrives, waves already influence the upper tower. Their motion reaches downward, especially in shallower water, moving light, stirring particles, and shifting small currents. The crown may receive more oxygenated water, more variable temperature, and stronger movement than the base. Mineral deposition may change accordingly. The tower's upper surface becomes a place where the surface world begins to be felt. Still, it remains underwater. The crown is washed in light, but not dried by air. Brine moves over it. Algae and small particles pass. The tufa holds a submerged coolness. This near-surface state may continue for a long time, depending on lake level. The tower waits without waiting, simply existing in the conditions around it until the basin balance changes again. When the lake lowers, the waterline approaches. It may hover near the crown for seasons, covering and uncovering it with waves. The tower begins to experience intervals of air and water. Wet, dry, wet again. Mineral crusts may form in new patterns.
Small organisms near the surface may use the changing edge. The tower's story becomes more varied. Eventually, more air surrounds it. The tower becomes visible from shore as a pale emerging form. It may still grow below the waterline if springs and chemistry continue there, while exposed portions weather above. This overlapping of processes is common in natural landscapes. Formation and alteration can happen at the same time, separated by height, moisture, or exposure. You can picture the tower during this transitional period, half in lake, half in air. Its lower body remains green and muted beneath the surface. Its upper body dries under sun and wind. Waves draw a moving line around it. Reflections tremble from the exposed part into the water. It belongs to both worlds so completely that neither feels separate. The present exposed towers carry this transitional memory. Even if they now stand mostly in air, their shape tells of submersion, and their weathering tells of exposure. They are layered not only physically, but experientially. You can feel submerged coolness and dry desert air in the same form. The Mono Basin allows both sensations to coexist in stillness. As we return to the shore once more, the half-submerged image fades and the present night gathers around the towers with patient clarity. The present night is quiet enough that you can almost hear your own attention moving. It travels from tower to water, from water to mountain, from mountain back to tower. The path is circular and slow. Each return finds the Tufa slightly different in the mind, more familiar, more restful, more connected to the basin around it. The scene settles into clarity without becoming sharp. A tower near the waterline catches a small wave. The wave darkens the base, leaves a brief shine, and withdraws. Another follows. The sound is mild, repeated, and low. You can imagine the carbonate surface cooling between touches. The stone has known this contact in many forms, from full submersion to occasional lapping, and each touch belongs to the same long relationship. Farther inland, a tower stands dry, surrounded by pale sediment. It no longer hears the wave directly, yet it remains a lake-made object. Its distance from the water is a clue to changing level. Its dryness is a current condition, not its whole identity. You can stand beside it and still feel water inside its history, as if the tower contains a shoreline within itself. The space between wet and dry towers helps show the basin's recent shape. Some forms remain close to Mono Lake, while others mark older margins or exposed spring areas. The arrangement is not random decoration. It is the visible result of hydrology, topography, and lake level. Even spacing becomes informative when you slow down enough to notice it. But information here does not need to become busyness. It can remain calm. The mind receives one detail, then lets it settle. A tower near water, a tower on dry ground, a terrace above, a dark lake below. Each feature is like a quiet note in a long composition. You do not have to follow every note consciously to be held by the music. The basin's openness keeps the composition spacious. Nothing crowds the towers except light, shadow, and weather. The lake lies broad beside them. The sky rises without obstruction. The mountains remain distant enough to frame rather than enclose. This spaciousness is part of the sleep feeling, because it lets thoughts spread out and lose their hard edges. As thoughts spread out, the Tufa towers become less like subjects and more like companions in the room of night. A companion does not need to speak. The tower's presence is enough. It has its own still history, its own rough surface, its own relationship to water and time. You can sit beside it in imagination without needing to ask anything more. The Mono Basin surrounds you both, wide and mineral-scented, with the lake breathing softly in the dark. There is a gentle humility in being near forms made over long time. The daily mind grows smaller, but not in a lonely way. It becomes relieved. The tower has held many evenings, many shifts of light, many changes of lake level. This one evening can rest among them. Your own breath can join the basin's slow rhythm for a little while. The Tufa does not judge the passing moment. It does not prefer clear sky to cloud, wet year to dry year, moonlight to sun. It simply responds through chemistry, weathering, reflection, and presence. That non-judgmental quality belongs to many geological forms, and it can be deeply soothing.
The world is not asking you to perform. It is only offering stillness. In that stillness, the science remains beautiful. Calcium carbonate is not a dry term here. It is the pale body of the tower, the roughness catching moonlight, the old spring made visible. Alkalinity is not only a measurement, it is the lake's mineral scent, its silky imagined feel, its capacity to build stone from a meeting. Evaporation is the quiet skyward lift that leaves the basin enriched. Every technical idea returns to sensation. Groundwater becomes cool hidden movement. Carbonate becomes pale stone. Closed basin becomes held water. Lake level becomes shoreline memory. Weathering becomes softened texture.
Ecology becomes small life, moving through mineral brightness. When facts become sensory, they can accompany sleep without becoming sharp. As we remain in this softened understanding, the night seems to deepen one layer more, and the towers fade toward silhouettes. Silhouettes remove detail and leave form. The Tufa towers become outlines against darker water or paler sky. Some are slender, some are clustered, some are low and rounded. Their identity remains, even with surface texture hidden. You can recognize them by shape alone, and shape itself becomes a kind of lullaby, repeated across the shore in gentle variation. The lake behind them is almost black now. It holds fewer reflections if the wind moves, more if calm returns. A star may tremble on the surface, then disappear. The mountains have become a long darkness at the edge of the basin. The shore beneath your imagined feet is cool and quiet. Nothing asks to be completed. The scene simply continues. This continuation is important. The basin does not end because our attention dims. The lake keeps responding to night air. The towers keep releasing heat. Groundwater keeps moving somewhere below. Minerals remain dissolved, ready for future meetings. Birds rest or pass unseen. Sediment waits at the bottom. Mono Basin continues in its own rhythm, beyond the edge of thought. Letting the place continue without you is restful. You do not have to hold it up with attention. You can drift, and the Tufa towers remain. You can forget a detail, and the spring history remains. You can sleep, and the lake remains under the stars, gathering, evaporating, reflecting, and quietly keeping the mineral memory of its basin. The shoreline grows softer in the mind, like a drawing gently blurred by mist, though the night air is dry and clear. The towers stand in that softness. Their pale forms no longer need description. They carry all we have followed: snowmelt, groundwater, carbonate, closed basin, evaporation, old lake levels, exposure, weathering, life, and silence. As silence gathers, we move one more time beneath the imagined waterline, where the towers are young again and the lake is dim with mineral light. The young towers rest below the old surface, pale and unfinished, with cool spring water still rising through the lake bed. Around them, Mono Lake holds its mineral darkness gently, and fine particles drift downward through the muted green light. You are close to the bottom now, where the sediment is soft and the motion of the surface has become only a distant memory. Here, the tufa does not need to be seen from shore. It is only forming, slowly, quietly, without witness. Calcium meets carbonate in the dim water, and a thin brightness gathers around the spring vent, layer by layer, breath by breath. The basin above is wide. The mountains are far away, and everything that once felt separate has settled into one calm depth. The lake bed receives what falls. Mineral grains, traces of algae, old dust from dry winds, and the faint remains of passing seasons come down softly and rest together. Nothing arrives with urgency. Nothing asks to be lifted again. The Tufa tower grows beside you in the darkness, and the Mono Basin holds it the way sleep holds a thought, without needing to explain it. So you settle there, at the quiet floor of this ancient inland lake, where stone is still becoming stone beneath the water. The last light fades above the tower. The spring keeps rising, too softly to hear. The sediment has been gathering for longer than the mind can follow, grain by grain, And now you are here, at the bottom of the basin, where it is finally quiet.